Hey everyone, welcome back to Planet Time. It's so good to have you here with us. This is our little corner of the universe where we try to slow things down, get comfortable, and just let our curiosity wander through some of the biggest and quietest questions we can think of. So, let's start with one of those. Let's start with a feeling. Have you ever looked up at the night sky, really looked away from the city lights, and felt a strange sense of quiet? Not just the absence of sound, but a deeper, more profound stillness. A feeling that's a little bit lonely, a little bit awe-inspiring. It's almost like the feeling you get when you arrive at a party long after it has peaked, when the music has softened and the most interesting guests have already gone home, leaving behind just a faint echo in the air. You cannot help but wonder what the conversation was like before you got there. I wonder what the sky looks like where you are right this moment. Maybe it's a brilliant cloudless blue. Or perhaps it's overcast, a soft gray ceiling above your world. Maybe you're listening to this late at night, and you can see that same dark star-dusted canvas that has sparked so much wonder in us for millennia. Whatever you are up to, I'm glad we can share this little pocket of time together. The thing is, we humans are a social species. We look for patterns, we listen for voices, and when we find ourselves in a vast, silent room, our first instinct is to wonder if anyone else has ever been there. We've spent decades now pointing our most sophisticated instruments at the stars, listening with incredible patience for a signal, a whisper, anything that might tell us we are not alone. And so far, all we've heard is the faint ambient hum of the cosmos. Just static. This silence has led to a lot of big theories, and even bigger questions. But today, I want to explore a much simpler, quieter idea. A thought that doesn't shout for attention but rather whispers from the dusty corners of our imagination. What if we are not the first? And what if the silence isn't a sign that nobody is out there, but a sign that somebody was? What if, long before our own story ever truly began, an entire civilization of this world, an older, perhaps wiser humanity, packed its bags and left? This isn't a story of alien invasion. There are no flying saucers or laser beams here. This is a story of departure. A ghost story on a planetary scale. It's a thought experiment that gently reframes our own history, suggesting we might be living in a house that was occupied long before we moved in. Imagine, for a moment, that the whole of human history is a vast, old house. It's a beautiful place, filled with character. We humans have explored most of it. We've mapped out the ground floor, that's our recorded history, the familiar stories of empires and kings, of science and art. We ventured down into the basement, that's our deeper past, the archaeology and paleontology that tell us about our ancient ancestors, about the very foundations of who we are. We feel like we know this house. We feel like it's ours. But what about the attic? Every old house has one. A space at the very top, under the eaves, filled with dust and forgotten things. We do not go up there very often. It's a little dark, a little mysterious. But what if we decided to climb that ladder? What if, in the dim light, we found things that don't belong to our family? Strange tools we don't recognize. Faint markings on the floorboards. The outline in the dust where a large, heavy trunk used to sit for centuries before it was moved. We wouldn't have a record of who lived here before, not really. All we'd have are these faint, puzzling clues that suggest a family moved out a long, long time ago. That's the feeling we're going to chase today. The feeling of being the new tenants of a very, very old world. If this is a feeling you've ever had, or a question that sparks your own curiosity, you can help our sleepy little signal find its way to other people who might be wondering about this too. A simple tap on a button is like turning up the volume just a little bit, helping a quiet voice travel farther through the static. We'd really appreciate it. So, Let's explore that attic. Where did this incredible idea, the idea of a predecessor civilization that took to the stars, even come from? You might think its roots are in ancient texts, in mysterious carvings, or cryptic prophecies. And we will get to those. But the modern version of this story, the one that really captured the public's imagination, is much younger than you think. Its origins aren't in stone tablets but on cheap paper. Let's go back to the early 20th century. It was an age of incredible, dizzying change. The world was being stitched together by telegraph wires and steamships. For the first time, humanity was lifting off the ground in sputtering, canvas-winged machines. There was a palpable sense of limitless possibility in the air. And this feeling was perfectly captured in the vibrant, chaotic world of pulp science fiction magazines. Magazines with names like Amazing Stories or Astounding Science Fiction. Their covers were explosive bursts of color, depicting brave, square-jawed heroes, bug-eyed monsters, and most importantly, sleek, silver rocket ships. These weren't meant to be serious literature. They were cheap, disposable, printed on rough, pulpy paper. But they were also vessels for some of the most powerful and enduring ideas of our time. They were a playground for the human imagination. Writers like Edgar Rice Burroughs dreamt of ancient, dying civilizations on Mars. H.P. Lovecraft wrote of cosmic beings who had visited Earth in primordial eons, leaving behind sleeping cities and forgotten gods. These stories weren't presented as fact, of course. They were fantastical adventures. But they planted a seed in our collective consciousness, the idea that Earth's history might be far longer and far stranger than what we were taught in school. They decoupled the idea of advanced technology from the future and suggested it might also lie deep in our past. They were, in a way, the first scribbles we found on the attic walls. They were us trying to imagine who might have lived here before. This seed lay dormant for a few decades, a fun idea relegated to fiction. But then, something happened that jolted it awake. We went to space. The 1950s and 60s changed everything. Suddenly, rocket ships weren't just on the covers of pulp magazines anymore. They were on our television screens, real machines of fire and steel, roaring into the heavens. The space race between the United States and the Soviet Union was more than a geopolitical contest. It was a profound psychological shift for all of humanity. We saw our own planet from the outside for the first time, a beautiful, fragile blue marble hanging in the blackness. The cosmos was no longer an abstract concept. It was a destination. And if Aifaway could do it, if we could build these incredible machines to leave our world, the question suddenly felt much more urgent. Could someone else have done it before us? This is where the idea exploded from fiction into a full-blown cultural phenomenon. In 1968, a Swiss author named Erich von Däniken published a book called Chariots of the Gods. The book asked a series of provocative questions. Were the Great Pyramids of Egypt and the giant lions in the Nazca Desert in Peru actually messages and markers for ancient space travelers? Were the gods described in ancient texts, who descended from the heavens in fiery chariots, actually misinterpretations of extraterrestrial visitors? The book was a global sensation. It sold millions of copies and was translated into dozens of languages. It perfectly tapped into the zeitgeist of the era. People were looking at the future in space, and von Däniken gave them a framework for seeing that same future reflected in our most ancient past. He took the what-if of the pulp magazines and presented it as a serious investigation, a collection of puzzles from the attic of civilization that mainstream science, he argued, was too afraid to touch. Now, it is important to say that the ancient astronaut theory, as it came to be known, has been overwhelmingly rejected by scientists and historians. The evidence presented is often based on misinterpretations of art, a misunderstanding of ancient engineering capabilities, and a tendency to see what one wants to see. But our goal here isn't to debunk it. It is to understand why it was, and still is, so incredibly popular. The appeal isn't really about the evidence. It's about the story. It's a story that says our ancestors weren't primitive or alone. It suggests that we are part of something much grander. It connects the stone tools in the museum with the rockets on the launch pad. It fills the great silent voids of prehistory with the hum of starships and the wisdom of celestial teachers. It's a comforting thought, isn't it? That the house wasn't empty when we arrived. That someone left the lights on for us. And so, this idea, born in fantasy and popularized by a new age of exploration, has become a permanent fixture in our cultural attic. It's a modern myth. It continues to evolve, showing up in our movies, our television shows, and our late-night conversations. But our documentary wants to take this myth and gently twist it. The popular version is about visitors who came to Earth. But what about the quieter, more melancholic version? The story of those who must die. Because a story about departure feels much more personal. It's not about them, it's about us. It's about the ones who were left behind. It transforms the mysterious artifacts of our world not into gifts from benevolent gods, but into the forgotten belongings of a family that moved on. It makes the silence of the cosmos feel less empty and more like a poignant, lingering absence. This is the thought we are going to hold on to as we continue our journey. We're going to wander through this old house of history and look at the familiar rooms from a new perspective. We'll listen for the echoes in the halls and wonder about the stories they might tell. So please, find a comfortable spot. Pour yourself a cup of tea or coffee if you'd like. Let your shoulders relax. There's no test at the end of this. There's only a quiet exploration of a fascinating idea. Let's begin. There's only a quiet exploration of a fascinating idea. Let's begin. Have you ever looked up at the night sky, really looked, away from the city lights, and felt a strange sense of quiet? A profound and ancient stillness. It can be peaceful, of course. But sometimes, doesn't it feel a little empty? Like you've arrived at a party long after the most interesting guests have already gone home. The music has faded, and all that's left is the echo of something you just missed. For a long time, we've scanned that quiet, listening for a signal, a sign, anything that says we're not alone. We've imagined what it would be like if someone came to visit us. But tonight, we're going to gently turn that idea on its head. We are going to explore a simple, quiet thought. What if we aren't the first? Not just the first to build cities or write poetry, but the first to look at those same stars and feel the undeniable pull to go there. What if the great silence we hear isn't because the universe is empty, but because the conversation on our own world has been over for a very, very long time? This isn't a story of alien invasion. There are no flying saucers or laser beams. It's a story of departure. A whisper in our collective history, a possibility of an older civilization. A people who grew up here, under this same yellow sun, who breathed this same air, and who, for reasons of their own, packed their bags and left. They moved out long before our own story truly began, leaving the planet to us. Think of human history as a vast old house. For generations, we've lived in it. We've explored the ground floor, mapped out the hallways, decorated the rooms, and made it our own. We've come to believe we're the first and only family to have ever lived here. We're comfortable. But what if, one day, we find a dusty old key to the attic? And when we climb up, we don't find ghosts or monsters. We just find things. Old tools we don't recognize. Strange markings on the floorboards. Faint outlines in the dust where furniture used to be. Nothing scary, just the undeniable evidence that someone else lived here before us. A whole family, with their own lives and their own stories, who moved out centuries ago. That's the journey we're on. We're not looking for aliens in the sky. We're climbing the stairs into the attic of our own planet's history, looking for the quiet traces of the family who moved out. It's a search that feels less like astronomy and more like archaeology of the imagination. Now you might think an idea this big must come from ancient scrolls or cryptic prophecies. But the truth is, the thought is much younger than you'd expect. It wasn't born in a dusty tomb, but in the vibrant, sometimes chaotic imagination of the modern world. Its roots are tangled up in our own recent history, our own hopes, and our own anxieties about technology and our place in the cosmos. To find the first seeds of this idea, we have to go back to the early 20th century. This was a time when the world was changing at a dizzying pace. Humanity had just learned to fly. Invisible waves could carry voices through the air. The old certainties were falling away, and for the first time, anything felt possible. And in that electric atmosphere, a new kind of storytelling was born, the pulp science fiction magazines. They were printed on cheap, rough paper that would turn yellow in a week, with lurid covers of rocket ships, strange monsters, and distant planets. They weren't high art, but they were a furnace of ideas. Writers like H.P. Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard, working for pennies a word, dreamed up entire timelines for Earth that stretched back into a past we never knew. They wrote stories of great, non-human civilizations rising and falling millions of years before the first human ancestor ever walked upright. In Lovecraft's tales, explorers in Antarctica would stumble upon the vast frozen city of an alien race that had lived there eons ago. These weren't stories about visitors from other stars, but about the old ones who were here long before us. They were the original tenants of the house. These pulp stories were, in a way, the first drafts of our documentary's theme. They were asking in a fantastical way, what if our planet has a history that's completely unknown to us? These stories weren't meant to be taken as fact, of course. They were just entertainment. But they did something important. They planted a seed in our collective mind. They created a space for us to imagine a version of Earth's history that was deeper, stranger, and far more complex than the one we learned in school. They were the first to suggest that maybe, just maybe, we weren't the first ones to turn on the lights in this very old house. It's a powerful thought, that the ground beneath our feet might hold the memory of a civilization so old, it has passed into the realm of myth and monsters. For decades, that idea remained in the realm of fiction. It was a fun thought experiment, a thrilling story to read on a rainy afternoon. But then, something happened that pulled it out of the pages of pulp magazines and into the mainstream conversation. Humanity went to space. The 1960s and 70s were a time of incredible optimism and wonder. We watched, live on our television sets, as human beings left the Earth. We saw them walk on the moon, a place that had been a symbol of the unattainable for all of history. The cosmos no longer felt distant, it felt like the next neighborhood over. And if we could do it, with our rockets and computers, then surely anyone, anywhere could. This new cosmic perspective created fertile ground for the seed that pulp fiction had planted. Suddenly, people began looking at our own planet with new eyes. They looked at the Great Pyramids of Egypt, the mysterious lines in the Nazca Desert of Peru, the colossal stone heads of Easter Island. And a question began to bubble up. How did ancient people, with their supposedly primitive tools, build these incredible things? This is where a man named Erich von Däniken entered the stage. In 1968, he published a book called Chariots of the Gods, and it became a global phenomenon. His theory, which became known as the ancient astronaut theory, was simple and electrifying. He proposed that our ancestors weren't alone. These massive, inexplicable structures were built either by extraterrestrial visitors or with their direct help. Ancient myths of gods descending from the sky weren't myths at all, he argued. They were eyewitness accounts of alien contact. The idea was a firestorm. It was debated on talk shows, featured in documentaries, and sold millions upon millions of books. For the first time, the idea of a lost, technological past wasn't just fiction. It was being presented as a plausible, albeit controversial, theory. It resonated with people because it offered a grand, exciting, and mysterious alternative to conventional history. It tapped into that post-moon landing feeling that we were part of a much larger, cosmic story. Now, we are not here to prove or disprove von Däniken's claims. The scientific community has largely dismissed them, pointing to the incredible ingenuity of ancient human cultures. But for our journey, the facts of the theory are less important than its existence. We're interested in why it became so popular. Why, at that specific moment in history, were we so ready to believe that we had help? That there were wiser, older beings in our past? It's because it speaks to that same feeling we started with. That feeling of loneliness. The idea that powerful, wise beings visited us is comforting. It means we weren't just a biological accident. Someone, somewhere, thought we were important. So we've seen how the idea of a lost technological past began as fiction, a wild tale in a pulp magazine, and then, fueled by our own journey into space, it became a popular theory that captured the world's imagination. It evolved from a story about ancient monsters into a story about ancient teachers. But this is where our own exploration takes a slight, but very important, turn. The classic ancient astronaut theory is about visitors. It's about aliens coming into Earth. Our question is different. It's quieter. What if these architects of the impossible weren't visitors at all? What if they were from here? What if they were the first family in the house, a truly ancient, terrestrial civilization that simply grew up, matured, and then left? This changes everything. It's no longer a story about alien intervention. It is a story about planetary succession. They aren't the sky gods who came down to teach our primitive ancestors. They are our predecessors. Perhaps they lived on a continent that no longer exists during a geological age we can barely comprehend. And perhaps they faced a challenge or an opportunity so great, their only option was to look up at the stars and see not just points of light, but destinations. A way out. This is the story of a departure, not an arrival. And it offers a different kind of solution to that feeling of quiet we sometimes get when looking at the night sky. The silence isn't because no one is out there. The silence is because the ones who made all the noise have already left the room. We are living in the quiet aftermath of their grand departure. We are the children who inherited the house after the parents moved away to a new city across the sea. So we have the core of our idea. A hypothesis born not from ancient texts, but from very modern dreams and questions. It is a way of looking at our world's oldest mysteries not as the work of gods from the sky, but as potential echoes of a civilization from our own deep past. But if a civilization did leave, they wouldn't just vanish without a trace. Even the most careful family leaves something behind in the attic. The question is, what would those traces look like? Before we start searching for forgotten tools and artifacts, we have to look at the stories. Before we had tales of rocket ships, humanity had much older legends. Stories of entire lands that vanished in a single day, of islands that disappeared beneath the waves. And the most famous of these, of course, is the story of Atlantis. It's a story that has captivated us for more than 2,000 years. The idea of a lost, advanced civilization, a utopia of wisdom and power that disappeared from the face of the earth. Plato, the Greek philosopher who first wrote it down, described it as an island nation, larger than Libya and Asia, combined, located just beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. He painted a picture of a magnificent society. They had brilliant engineers, grand architecture, a powerful military, and a society that was noble and just. For generations, they were a model of human potential. But then, as the story goes, their hubris grew. They fell out of favor with the gods. And in a single, terrible day and night of misfortune, the island of Atlantis disappeared, swallowed by the sea. And that's the image we've all held on to, isn't it? A cataclysm of earthquakes and floods. A golden city sinking beneath the waves, lost to the dark, crushing pressure of the deep ocean. We've sent submarines to search for it. We've scanned the ocean floor. We've debated its possible location from the Mediterranean to the Caribbean. We've always looked down into the water. But let's pause for a moment and ask a quiet question. What if we've been looking in entirely the wrong direction? What if the story of Atlantis sinking into the sea was a metaphor? A description of an event so far outside the understanding of ancient people that they had to use the language they had? What if the sea it vanished into wasn't the Atlantic Ocean at all, but the great, dark, silent ocean of space? It sounds strange at first, I know. But think about it. How would you describe a rocket launch if you had no words for rocket, or engine, or fuel, or outer space? You would be an eyewitness to the most incredible event in human history, and you'd be forced to explain it using the world you knew. It's like the analogy of a child trying to describe a modern airplane. A child who has only ever known birds and clouds and the weather. They wouldn't say they saw a fixed-wing aircraft powered by jet propulsion. They would say they saw a great metal bird, bigger than any eagle, with a belly that shone like the sun. They wouldn't talk about engine thrust. They would talk about a roar that came from the bird's belly, a sound louder than any thunder they had ever heard, a sound that shook the leaves on the trees and rattled their own bones. They wouldn't describe it achieving escape velocity. They would describe it climbing a ladder of smoke into the sky, a pillar of cloud that this great bird rode all the way up until it disappeared into the heavens. They might even say it flew into the sun, because that's where it seemed to go. The description is completely honest. The child is telling you exactly what they saw and heard. They aren't lying. But their vocabulary, their frame of reference, transforms a technological event into a mythic one. A flight from one city to another becomes the story of a magical bird ascending to the home of the gods. Now, let's apply that same logic back to Atlantis. What if the story of an island sinking into the sea is just an ancient attempt to describe a landmass lifting off the sea? An entire city, or a massive ship the size of a city, ascending on a pillar of fire and cloud, leaving behind nothing but an empty space in the ocean. To an observer on the shore, watching from miles away, it would look like the island itself was consumed by the water and the sky. It would simply vanish. When you start to look at it this way, through this lens, you begin to see echoes of this idea hidden all over the world, in countless other myths that we've always taken as pure fantasy. Suddenly, the stories of gods who live in a kingdom in the sky do not sound so strange. The Greek gods on Mount Olympus, the Norse gods in Asgard connected to us by a rainbow bridge, the Hindu Deva in their celestial cities. We've always seen these as stories about the supernatural, about a spiritual realm entirely separate from our own. But what if they weren't separate at all? What if they were just high up? These stories, from cultures that had no contact with one another, share some fascinatingly specific details. The sky gods are almost always described as having incredible powers, the ability to throw lightning from their hands, to create thunderous noises, to fly through the air in shining chariots. They possess incredible knowledge of agriculture, of mathematics, of astronomy, which they sometimes share with a chosen few humans. And most importantly, they almost always come from the sky, and eventually they return there. Think of the story of the Anunnaki from ancient Sumerian texts, the ones who from heaven to earth came. Or the tales of the Maya, who believed their ancestors descended from the Pleiades star cluster. Consider the countless petroglyphs carved by ancient peoples around the globe, depicting figures in strange suits with helmets, figures that look uncannily like modern-day astronauts. We've traditionally labeled these as religious symbols, as gods and spirits. But if we take off our modern, sophisticated glasses for a moment and try to see the world through their eyes, another possibility emerges. A beam of energy from an advanced tool could easily be described as a bolt of lightning. The sonic boom from a vehicle breaking the sound barrier would be a clap of thunder from the heavens. A sleek, metallic spacecraft, catching the light of the sun, would absolutely look like a chariot of fire. These ancient people weren't being foolish or primitive. They were being reporters. They were documenting what they saw, using the only words and concepts they had. The event was technological, but the description became mythological. So, the stories of Atlantis, the stories of sky-dwelling gods, the legends of vanished lands, maybe they aren't separate tales at all. Maybe they are all just different cultures' attempts to describe the very same, singular event. A memory of a technological departure, an exodus from Earth, fragmented into 1,000 different myths and legends. The core of the story is always the same. They were here, they were powerful, and then they left. This idea flips our understanding of mythology on its head. It suggests that these stories are not just the dreams of our ancestors, but perhaps the faded memories of our ancestors. It's a subtle difference, but it changes everything. It means that deep within our oldest, most sacred stories, we might have been preserving a garbled, whispered history of a civilization that came before us. It is an incredible thought, really. That the memory has survived at all is a miracle. Think about how stories change over just a few generations. Details get lost, names are forgotten, timelines get blurred. Now, imagine a story being passed down not for 100 years, but for 10,000 or 50,000 or more. It is like the ultimate game of telephone, played across the entire span of human history. The original message might have been a precise, technical account. The vessel, designation Atlantis, achieved orbital departure 800 hours, utilizing a single-stage fusion drive. After 1,000 years of retelling around a campfire, that story becomes the shining island of the gods. Atlantis rode a pillar of fire into the sky and vanished in the morning. After 10,000 years, it becomes the gods grew angry, and in their wrath, they sent fire and floods to sink the great island of Atlantis beneath the sea in a single day and night. The technical details are the first thing to go. But the core of the event, the awe, the power, the fire, the sudden disappearance, that part of the memory is so powerful, so deeply burned into the collective psyche, that it survives. It becomes the seed of a myth that can endure for eons. This reframes the search for Atlantis entirely. Maybe the archaeologists and explorers have been looking in the right place, but at the wrong time. The clues aren't buried under layers of mud on the ocean floor. They are buried under layers of metaphor in our oldest stories. The evidence isn't geological, it is linguistic. It is mythological. We've been trying to read our myths like fairy tales, when perhaps we should be reading them like faded blueprints. Like a distorted echo of a real event, an event so profound it marked the beginning of our own story. The idea that we were not the first, that another, older civilization shared this planet with us, is a humbling one. But the idea that they left, that adds a layer of mystery and even a little sadness to it. Why did they go? Where did they go? And when they vanished into that great dark sea of stars, did they leave anything behind? These aren't just questions about a hypothetical past. They touch on our own future. We are, right now, standing at the edge of our own departure. We are sending probes to distant worlds. We are planning colonies on the Moon and Mars. We are preparing to dip our own toes into that same cosmic ocean. Perhaps by looking back at these ancient fragmented stories, we are not just trying to understand our past. Perhaps, subconsciously, we are searching for a map, a warning, a message in a bottle left for us on the shores of time, telling us about the voyage that lies ahead. The story of a lost island that sank beneath the waves might just be the most important story we have. A story that's not about an end, but about a beginning. Not a sinking, but a launch. The story of the day the world changed forever, when our quiet little planet and the sky, once filled with gods, became silent. A great, cosmic silence that we are still trying to understand to this day. And the sky, once filled with gods, became silent. A great, cosmic silence that we are still trying to understand to this day. It's a silence that feels profound. It is not just the absence of noise. It is the kind of quiet you feel in a place that should be bustling with life. Like walking to a grand train station in the middle of the night, long after the last train has departed. All the architecture is there, all the signs of purpose, but the people, the motion, the life, it's gone. You can almost hear the ghost of the crowd, cannot you? That's the silence we are talking about. A silence that feels heavy, with a story that's already been told. Our modern attempt to understand this story doesn't begin in an ancient temple or with a forgotten text. It begins, of all places, during a lunch break. The year is 1950. The place is the Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico, a site buzzing with some of the most brilliant minds on the planet. One of those minds belonged to a physicist named Enrico Fermi. He was a Nobel laureate, a man whose intellect helped shape the 20th century. But on this particular day, walking to lunch with his colleagues, he wasn't thinking about his own monumental work. He was looking up, metaphorically speaking, and he was puzzled. After some casual chat about recent UFO reports in the news, the conversation moved on. But Fermi's mind was stuck. He was quiet for a moment, and then, seemingly out of nowhere, he asked a question. It was a simple question, just 4 words, but it would echo through the halls of science for the next 70 years. What he asked was, "Where is everybody?" That's it. That's the whole thing. Not a complex equation, not a formal hypothesis, just a moment of pure, honest curiosity over a meal. Where is everybody? And in that moment, what we now call the Fermi paradox was born. It's a paradox because it highlights a massive, glaring contradiction between what we expect to be true and what we actually see. Or in this case, what we do not yet see. Let's break down the logic, because it is both incredibly simple and mind-bendingly vast. It starts with the stars. For most of human history, the stars were just little points of light. But now we know what they are. They are suns. And our own sun, the one that warms your face on a clear day, is just one of many. It's not particularly special, not unusually large or small. It is a pretty average, run-of-the-mill star. And in our galaxy, the Milky Way, there are, by conservative estimates, over 100 billion other stars. Some estimates push that number closer to 400 billion. 100 billion. It's a number so large it's practically meaningless to our minds. So let's try an analogy. Imagine all the beaches on Earth. All the deserts. Now, try to imagine counting every single grain of sand. You couldn't. It's an impossible task. There are more stars in our galaxy alone than there are grains of sand on all the beaches of our entire world. So, point 1. The universe isn't short on real estate. There are a staggering number of suns out there. Now, for point 2, a sun is great, but you need planets. For a long time, we didn't know if other stars had planets like ours does. It seemed likely, but we couldn't prove it. Then we built powerful new telescopes, instruments like the Kepler Space Telescope, and we pointed them at the sky. What we found was stunning. It turns out that planets are not the exception. They are the rule. The vast majority of stars have planets orbiting them. It is just what stars do. And it gets even more specific. We started finding planets in what astronomers call the habitable zone, or the Goldilocks zone. That's the orbital sweet spot. Not too hot, not too cold, but just right for liquid water to potentially exist on the surface. And as we know from our own world, where you find water, you tend to find life. So how many of these just right Earth-like planets are there? Again, the numbers are dizzying. Recent calculations suggest there could be as many as 40 billion potentially habitable, Earth-sized planets in our galaxy alone. 40 billion worlds that might look, from a distance, a lot like our own. Think about that. For every single human being alive on Earth right now, there are at least 5 other planets in our galaxy that could, in principle, be a home for life. So, we have billions upon billions of stars. We have billions of potentially Earth-like planets. The ingredients seem to be everywhere. But the final part of the paradox is the most important one: time. Our universe is old. Incredibly, profoundly old. About 13.8 billion years old, in fact. Our own planet, Earth, is a relative newcomer, at about 4-5 billion years old. This means that for billions of years before our world even formed, other worlds were circling other suns. There have been countless opportunities for life to arise, to evolve, to become intelligent, and to develop technology. If even a tiny fraction of 1% of those billions of habitable planets developed life, and a tiny fraction of giant life became intelligent like us, the galaxy should have been populated millions, if not billions, of years before we ever showed up. An advanced civilization would only need a few million years, a mere blink of an eye in cosmic time, to develop technologies that could allow them to travel between stars, or at the very least, send signals. Over the eons, the galaxy should have been thoroughly explored, colonized, or at the very least, filled with the noise of countless civilizations going about their business. It should be loud. There should be signals, probes, artifacts, something. The logic is so powerful it feels inevitable. And so we come back to Fermat's question, sitting there at the lunch table. Given all of that, where is everybody? Because when we point our own technology to the sky, when we aim our massive radio telescopes, our planetary ears, at the stars and listen, we are met with the most profound and unsettling silence. We hear nothing. Or, to be more precise, we hear the background noise of the universe itself. We hear the faint, residual heat from the Big Bang, a cosmic microwave hum that fills all of space. We hear the hiss and crackle of distant pulsars and quasars, natural, chaotic, cosmic phenomena. It's like being in the middle of a vast wilderness at night. You can hear the wind in the trees and the rush of a distant river, but you do not hear any voices. No campfires. No songs. Since the 1960s, projects under the banner of SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, have been systematically scanning the radio dial, listening for a single structured, artificial signal. A beacon. A television broadcast. A galactic weather report. Anything that would stand out from the natural static. And in all those decades of listening, we have found absolutely nothing. The silence is the paradox. The numbers say the universe should be a bustling city of lights and sounds, but all we can perceive is an empty countryside. It's a deep, contemplative loneliness. It makes you feel very small and very, very alone. You shout a question into the cosmos, and the only thing that comes back is the faint echo of your own voice. Scientists have proposed dozens of possible solutions to this silence. Maybe intelligent life is incredibly rare. Maybe civilizations always destroy themselves before they can cross the stars. Maybe the universe is a dangerous place, and everyone else is deliberately hiding, staying quiet so as not to attract predators. These are called dark forest theories. Or maybe they are out there, but they are communicating in ways we cannot even comprehend, like we are an ant in the middle of a fiber optic cable, completely unaware of the information flowing around us. But our story, the one we are exploring here, offers another possibility. It's a quieter, more melancholy solution to the great paradox. Maybe the universe isn't empty. Maybe we are just in a neighborhood where the elders have already moved on. This idea gently turns the paradox on its head. It suggests that the silence isn't a sign of absence, but a sign of a past presence. It doesn't mean we are the first. It means we are the last, or at least the latest. Let's use our central analogy for this part. Imagine walking into a massive, ancient library. The room is cavernous. Sunlight streams through the high windows, catching dust motes dancing in the air. The shelves stretch up into the darkness, filled with the potential for infinite knowledge. But as you walk the aisles, you notice something strange. All the books are gone. Every single one has been checked out. You can still smell the faint, sweet scent of old paper and leather. You can see the indentations in the dust where the books used to sit. You can feel the weight of the knowledge that once filled this room. The library isn't empty in the sense that it was never used. It's empty because it was used, and used well. And then, for reasons you do not understand, everyone left and took the books with them. The silence of that library isn't the silence of a void. It's the silence of departure. Our theory proposes that this is the silence we are hearing from the cosmos. The great civilizations rose, they flourished, they communicated, and they filled the galaxy with their presence. But they did this an unimaginably long time ago. They were the first tenants of this cosmic house. And when their time here was done, they packed their bags and they left. They moved on. And we, humanity, are like a new family moving into that old house, centuries later. We are wandering through the empty rooms, noticing the scuff marks on the floor and the faint outline of where a picture once hung on the wall. We are calling out, "Hello? Is anyone home?" And all we hear back is the echo of our own voice in the vast, empty halls. This solution to the Fermi paradox is so compelling because it doesn't require us to believe that we are special or that life is impossibly rare. It simply requires us to believe that we might be late to the party. The silence we hear isn't a sign that the party never happened. It is the quiet aftermath, long after the music has stopped and the guests have all gone home. So when we look up at the night sky, filled with its billions of silent stars, we are not necessarily looking at a great emptiness. We might be looking at a great memory. The silence isn't an answer, it is a clue. A clue that suggests a story has already unfolded on the grandest possible scale. The library may be empty, but a good librarian always leaves a trace. A mark on a shelf, a forgotten bookmark, a scuff on the floor. Though, if a civilization really did leave, what kind of footprints would they leave behind? What subtle clues might we find, not in the sky, but right here, under our feet, in the very stone of their old, abandoned home? So, if a civilization really did leave, what kind of footprints would they leave behind? What subtle clues might we find, not in the sky, but right here, under our feet, in the very stone of their old, abandoned home? It is a simple idea, really. Anyone who has ever moved out of a house or an apartment knows it is almost impossible to leave no trace. You might patch the nail holes in the wall and sweep the floors, but you'll miss something. A single scuff mark on the hardwood from where the sofa used to be. A child's forgotten drawing that slipped behind the water heater. A faint outline on the wall where a picture hung for 20 years, the paint just a shade lighter than the rest of the room. These aren't grand monuments. They are just quiet little whispers of a life that was lived there. They are the echoes in an empty room. Now, let's take that idea and scale it up. Way, way up. What if the house wasn't a house, but an entire planet? And what if the family that moved out wasn't a family, but an entire civilization? What would they leave behind? It is tempting to imagine finding the ruins of a great city, with towers of glass and steel piercing the clouds. But time is the ultimate destroyer. Over millions of years, even the mightiest city would be ground down to dust and sand by wind and rain, and the slow, relentless shifting of the continents. Anything obvious would be long gone. So if we want to find any evidence, we cannot look for the house itself. We have to look for the scuff marks. The planetary equivalent of a forgotten drawing behind the radiator. This brings us to a strange and fascinating category of discoveries, a collection of oddities that historians and archaeologists like to call out-of-place artifacts, or operts for short. The name says it all, really. They are things that have been found in places, or more often, in time periods, where they simply do not seem to belong. They are like a modern, stainless steel screw found embedded deep inside a petrified log that's millions of years old. Your brain just stumbles on it. It doesn't make sense, and that's precisely what makes it so interesting. Now, it is really important to say this up front. We are not presenting these as definitive proof of anything. 99% of these things have perfectly reasonable, down-to-earth explanations. But we are not here today as rigid academics. We are here as curious detectives, looking at a very, very cold case. And a good detective knows that sometimes the most important clue is the one that just feels wrong. The detail that doesn't fit the official story. Let's start with perhaps the most famous of these puzzles. In the year 1900, a group of Greek sponge divers were exploring a Roman-era shipwreck off the coast of the island of Antikythera. Among the statues and pottery, they recovered a lump of corroded bronze, about the size of a large book. For decades, it sat in a museum, largely ignored, just another piece of junk from the bottom of the sea. But as our technology got better, we started to look inside that lump. Using X-rays and advanced AT scans, scientists were able to peel back the layers of time and corrosion. And what they found inside was breathtaking. It was a machine, filled with a complex and intricate system of at least 37 interlocking bronze gears. There were dials and pointers, and inscriptions describing the movements of the sun, the moon, and the 5 planets that were known to the ancient Greeks. It was, for all intents and purposes, an astronomical computer. A clockwork model of the cosmos. By turning a knob, you could predict eclipses, track the phases of the moon, and even figure out the date of the next Olympic Games. The problem is, it was built over 2,000 years ago. Let that sink in for a moment. The level of precision engineering, the mathematical and astronomical knowledge required to build the Antikythera mechanism, as it is now called, is something we didn't think was possible in the ancient world. Nothing even approaching its complexity would appear again in human history for over 1,000 years, until the great cathedral clocks of medieval Europe. It is like finding the schematics for a smartphone in the library of a medieval monastery. It is a technological island, separated from everything else we know by an ocean of time. So, how do you explain it? The mainstream view is that it represents a lost branch of Greek technology, the work of a singular, forgotten genius like Archimedes. And that's a perfectly good explanation. It is probably the right one. But in the context of our thought experiment, it makes you wonder. What if it wasn't a brand new invention? What if it was a copy? Or a copy of a copy? A faint, mechanical echo of a technology that was once far more advanced, handed down through generations until only this one brilliant fragment remained. It is a puzzle. A beautiful, intricate puzzle made of bronze, left for us at the bottom of the sea. It's a footprint in the stone of history that feels just a little too sharp, a little too modern, for the ground it was found on. But the traces left behind might not always be something you can hold in your hand. Some might be far more subtle, woven into the very fabric of the planet itself. The Earth keeps a diary, written in layers of rock and ice. Each layer tells a story about the climate, about the atmosphere, about the life that existed in that particular moment of geologic time. And for the most part, the story is consistent. It is a slow, gradual tale of change. But every now and then, geologists find a page in that diary that doesn't make sense. A strange chemical signature, a weird ratio of elements, or what are known as isotopic anomalies. Now, an isotope is just a different flavor of a chemical element. Think of it like this. You have water, and you have heavy water. They're both water, but the heavy water has a little something extra in its atoms. Nature produces these different flavors in very predictable, very stable proportions. We know exactly what the natural ratio of, say, uranium isotopes should be in any given rock sample. And yet, in a few places on Earth, those ratios are off. The most famous example is in a country called Gabon, in West Africa. Back in the 1970s, French scientists analyzing uranium ore from a mine there noticed something very odd. The uranium was depleted. Specifically, the isotope uranium-235, the kind you need for nuclear fission, was missing a small amount. It was as if the uranium had already been used. After extensive investigation, scientists came to a truly mind-bending conclusion. The site in Gabon, known as Oklo, was the remnant of a natural nuclear reactor. 2 billion years ago, a rare combination of groundwater, uranium concentration, and geological conditions had come together to kickstart a self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction that ran in pulses for hundreds of thousands of years. It's an incredible, humbling reminder that nature itself can produce phenomena that seem impossibly advanced. But it also gives us a template for what to look for. The chemical fingerprint of large-scale nuclear fission. Within our quiet story of a civilization that departed, this raises a gentle question. The Oklo reactor is natural. But what if, somewhere else in the geological record, we find a similar fingerprint that cannot be explained by natural processes? A thin layer of rock from 100 million years ago that contains the kind of processed isotopes you'd only expect to find in the waste products of an advanced industrial society. A chemical whisper that says, "We were here, and we were building something big." It's a bit like being a forensic accountant, but for the planet. You're not looking for a smoking gun. You're looking for a single number in a ledger that's out of place. A transaction that doesn't add up. Most of the time, it is just a clerical error. But sometimes it's the clue that unravels the entire story. We are not just looking for artifacts. We are looking for the chemical shadows they might have cast. And then there's the most basic kind of footprint of all, a hole in the ground. Building a civilization, especially a technological one, requires resources. You need to dig things up. You need iron, copper, gold, uranium, rare earth metals. Mining is one of the most fundamental industrial activities. It is also one that can leave scars on the landscape that last for a very, very long time. We have a pretty good map of humanity's mining history. We know when we started digging for copper to kick off the Bronze Age. We can trace the vast quarrying operations of the Romans. But what if some of the world's oldest mines are older than we think? And what if their scale doesn't quite match what we'd expect from early humans with simple tools? Consider a place like the Lion Cave in the mountains of Eswatini in southern Africa. Archaeologists have found evidence of mining for hematite, a rich iron ore that dates back at least 43,000 years. The conventional explanation is that our Stone Age ancestors were mining it for ochre, the red pigment they used for rock paintings and ritual body decoration. And again, that's a perfectly logical, well-supported theory. But let's just step back and look at it through the lens of our what-if scenario. A 43,000-year-old mine. For paint. It makes sense. But what if that wasn't the whole story? What if the reason for the mine wasn't just decorative, but industrial? What if the materials being extracted weren't just for painting caves, but for building something far more complex? The evidence we see today might just be the last, fading stages of a much larger operation, a final scraping of the barrel by the early humans who moved in after the original miners had gone. It's like finding a small hand-dug well and assuming it was only ever used to get a bucket of water. But what if it is all that's left of a massive industrial borehole that has since collapsed and filled in over millennia? We are not trying to rewrite history here. We are simply looking at the existing evidence and turning it over in our hands, looking at it from a different angle. We are asking if there's another way to read the story written in these ancient holes in the ground. These are the puzzles. The Antikythera mechanism, a piece of clockwork from the future found in the past. The strange isotopic ratios in the Earth's crust, a chemical signature that hints at an unnatural process. The ancient mines, holes in the ground that seem just a little too old, a little too ambitious. Each one on its own is an interesting anomaly, a footnote in a history textbook. But when you place them side by side, they start to paint a curious picture. They feel like a collection of clues from a crime scene where the body has long since vanished, and all you have left are a few disparate, confusing pieces of evidence. A button, a single footprint, a misplaced object. This is the work of the cold case detective. You do not jump to conclusions. You do not get carried away by a single clue. You gather all the little things that do not fit, all the details that make you pause and say, that's odd. You hold them up to the light. You know that individually, they might mean nothing. But together, they might be telling you that the story you thought you knew is missing a vital chapter. These footprints in stone, these oparts, are whispers. They are not shouts. They do not prove that an ancient civilization built starships and left our world. But they do gently suggest that our history might be more complex, more mysterious, and more surprising than we currently imagine. They are the scuff marks on the floor of our planetary home, reminding us that we might not have been the first tenants. We've been looking for the physical traces, the hardware they might have left behind. A gear, a chemical, a hole in the ground. But what about the software? What about the impression an event like a global departure would leave on the minds of those who witnessed it? For our distant ancestors, this wouldn't have been a technological event. It would have been magic. It would have been the day the gods left. Perhaps the most profound evidence they left behind wasn't etched in rock at all, but was burned into the human imagination itself. Perhaps the most profound evidence they left behind wasn't etched in rock at all, but was burned into the human imagination itself. Imagine, for a moment, that you are one of our distant ancestors. Your world is one of stone, wood, and fire. The sky is the home of the sun, the moon, and the spirits. Your understanding of the universe is built on what you can touch and what you can see. And then, one day, you witness the impossible. You do not see a rocket. You do not understand orbital mechanics or escape velocity. You see a mountain, a colossal piece of the very earth, begin to tremble and groan. You see a light brighter than the sun bloom at its base, a pillar of fire that pushes back the sky. The ground shakes so violently it throws you to your knees. The sound isn't just a sound, it is a physical force that hits you in the chest, a roar that seems to tear the fabric of the world. And as you watch, in utter, terrified awe, you see that mountain lift from the ground. Slowly at first, then with impossible speed, it climbs into the air, riding its column of flame, until it becomes a new, man-made star that vanishes into the deep, black ocean of the heavens. How would you describe that? What words would you use? You have no language for propulsion or technology. You only have the language of your world. You would say, you saw the gods ascend to their home. You would say you witnessed a chariot of fire, a flying mountain, an island that sailed not on the water, but on the sky. You would speak of beings who could command the thunder and shake the earth, who lived in the heavens and have now returned there. The event would be so profound, so utterly outside of your reality, that it would become the cornerstone of a new reality. It would become myth. It would become religion. It would become the single most important story your people would ever tell. A story of the day the gods left. But what happens after? After the sky has gone quiet and the ground has stopped shaking? What happens when you are left behind in a world that suddenly feels emptier? If these powerful beings brought knowledge, or safety, or just a sense of wonder, how would you try to get them to come back? This isn't just a hypothetical question. It is a question that anthropology has a fascinating and deeply human answer for. It leads us to one of the most curious phenomena of human behavior, the cargo cult. To understand it, we have to travel much more recently in time, to the islands of Melanesia in the South Pacific during and after the Second World War. For countless generations, the people of these islands lived in isolated, pre-industrial societies. Their world was one of canoes, fishing, and tribal traditions. Then, suddenly, their world was turned upside down. Massive, noisy birds made of metal descended from the sky and landed on flattened strips of earth the foreigners had carved from the jungle. From the bellies of these birds came men with pale skin, and with them came magic, an endless supply of what they called cargo. Canned food that never spoiled, miraculous medicine that could cure the sick, sharp tools, powerful weapons, and fabrics of impossible color and strength. To the islanders, these weren't manufactured goods from factories thousands of miles away. How could they be? They were gifts from the heavens, delivered by the strange men and their metal birds. The soldiers on the ground didn't seem to make these things, they just performed strange rituals. They would march in straight lines, raise flags up poles, sit in huts wearing headphones and speaking in codes. And after these rituals, the sky birds would return with more cargo. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the war ended. The soldiers packed up, the metal birds flew away one last time, and the magic stopped. The cargo was gone. Imagine the confusion, the loss. The people on those islands, wanting to bring back the prosperity they had briefly tasted, did the most logical thing they could. They tried to repeat the rituals they had observed. They carved their own runways out of the jungle. They built life-sized replicas of the airplanes out of bamboo, straw, and vines. They carved wooden headphones and sat in mock control towers, speaking gibberish into tin can radios. They marched with sticks over their shoulders, mimicking the soldiers' drills. They were trying to summon the gods back. They were trying to get the cargo to return. It is so easy to look at this from our modern perspective and see it as naive or primitive. But it is not. It is a profoundly human response. It's an attempt to find a cause for an effect you do not understand. If you see someone perform a dance, and then it rains, you might believe the dance causes the rain. If you see soldiers march, and then a plane full of food arrives, you'll believe the marching causes the planes to come. It's the same logic, just applied to a different set of circumstances. It's a perfect real-world example of that old analogy, a child trying to explain a modern airplane using only words for birds and clouds. So, let's take this very real, very human pattern of behavior, and let's cast it back into the deep past. Let's look at it through the lens of our theory, the departure of a hyper-advanced ancient civilization. Could some of our own planet's most mysterious ancient monuments be a form of large-scale cargo cult behavior? A message, a ritual, a runway for those who left. Consider the Nazca lines in the desert plains of southern Peru. These are geoglyphs, enormous designs etched into the ground. There are hundreds of them, straight lines that go on for miles, and massive, stylized depictions of animals. A spider, a hummingbird, a monkey. The truly bizarre thing about them is that they are so large, they are completely unrecognizable from the ground. You can only see what they are from high up in the air. For generations, people have asked, why? Why would a culture spend so much time and effort creating enormous pieces of art that they themselves could never properly see? It doesn't make sense, unless the art wasn't for them. What if it was for someone else? Someone they expected to be looking down from above. It's almost as if they were saying, look, we are still here. This is the place. Please, come back. Nanshihan. Seen through that lens, the Nazca lines suddenly transform from a baffling mystery into a poignant, understandable message. Or think of the great pyramids of Giza. We see them as tombs for the pharaohs, and they certainly were. But they were so much more than that. Their mathematical precision is staggering. Their alignment to the cardinal directions is almost perfect. Certain shafts within the Great Pyramid point directly to specific stars, like those in the constellation Orion. Why such an obsession with the heavens? Why build these massive, mountain-like structures that seem to act as pointers to the sky? Traditional archaeology offers many complex and valid explanations. But the cargo cult hypothesis offers a simpler, more emotionally resonant one. What if you were trying to build a landmark that couldn't be missed? A beacon for returning travelers? What if the precise alignments weren't just for calendars or religious purposes, but were a form of address? A way of saying, we remember where you went. We are still watching. This is your homing beacon. Seen this way, the pyramids aren't just tombs for the dead, but landing markers for the departed. This way of thinking acts like a new key, one that might unlock the emotional purpose behind some of these ancient mysteries. It suggests a shared global memory, not of aliens visiting, but of a parent civilization leaving. And what followed was a long, planetary-scale attempt by humanity, the children left behind, to call them home. This impulse is rooted in one of our most basic survival tools, pattern recognition. Let's use the analogy from our outline. Imagine a remote tribe finds a dropped Zippo lighter. They do not understand butane, or a flint wheel, or combustion. But they learn that if they flick the little wheel and press the button, this magical, life-giving thing called fire appears. It becomes a sacred object. They do not worship the lighter itself. They worship the why process, the ritual that brings the fire. Now, imagine the lighter runs out of fluid. The ritual stops working. What do? They keep trying. They build a larger, more elaborate replica of the lighter out of wood. They anoint it with sacred oils. They perform the ritual with even greater fervor. They're doing exactly what they think they need to do to bring the magic back. Our ancestors, witnessing a technological departure they couldn't comprehend, would be like that tribe with the Zippo. They saw beings perform what looked like rituals, perhaps countdowns, specific alignments, or ground preparations, and the result was a mountain ascending to the heavens. So, in the aftermath, they did their best to copy those rituals. They built their own mountains out of stone, aligned them to the stars they saw the ships depart towards, and waited. It's a heartbreakingly human idea, isn't it? That for thousands of years, our ancestors might have been staring up at the sky, not just in wonder, but in waiting. That our grandest achievements, the very monuments we point to as the dawn of our own civilization, might have been born from a profound sense of abandonment. They may be echoes of a departure, grand and desperate signals sent to beings who were long gone and would never return. These acts of imitation, these cargo cult behaviors, wouldn't just be about building things. They would fundamentally shape our cultures, our religions, and our very psychology. And that raises an even deeper question. What if these grand, desperate signals sent to the sky weren't just a reaction to the departure, but the very first step in a chain of events that would define who we are? And that raises an even deeper question. What if these grand, desperate signals sent to the sky weren't just a reaction to the departure, but the very first step in a chain of events that would define who we are? There's a simple, beautiful idea in our understanding of the universe called causality. It is the law of cause and effect. A stone drops into a quiet pond, and ripples spread out, touching every part of the shore. It is an unbroken chain. The stone causes the ripple causes the water to lap against the reeds. The sound of the lapping water causes a nearby frog to jump. One action leading to another, and another, and another. It's the engine of our reality. We tend to think of human history as our own story. A story that started with us. With the first tools, the first fires, the first words. But what if that's not the beginning? What if the real beginning, the true first cause of our entire journey, wasn't an action we took, but an action taken long before we were here? Let's imagine it. What if the departure of this ancient precursor civilization was the very first stone thrown into the pond of human history? Think about what that really means. It suggests that everything that came after, every choice we made, every society we built, every question we asked, was, in some small way, a ripple spreading out from that single silent event. Their leaving didn't just end their story, it began ours. Our history, then, isn't a monologue. It is a dialogue with an absence. A long, slow response to a question we never heard asked. So how would that work? What would that ripple even look like? Well, we can imagine it in two very different, but equally powerful, ways. The first is the power of a vacuum. When they left, they didn't just leave a planet. They left a space at the top. A void of intelligence, of mastery, of purpose. And history, just like nature, does not like a vacuum. Something always rushes in to fill it. Perhaps that something was us. Imagine for a moment that they had stayed. Imagine humanity evolving on a planet that already had a wise, powerful, technological civilization guiding things. We would have been, in a sense, a protected species. They might have been benevolent, kind, acting as our teachers or our caretakers. It sounds nice, doesn't it? A safe world, a guided evolution. But when you are guided, you do not learn to find your own way. When you are protected, you do not develop the strength to protect yourself. There's that classic, beautiful analogy of a parent teaching a child to ride a bicycle. The parent holds onto the seat, running alongside, keeping the child steady. The child feels confident, balanced, secure, but they aren't really riding the bike. The most important moment in that entire process, the moment that truly matters, is the moment the parent lets go. The child might wobble. They might panic for a second. They might even fall. But it is only in that moment of being alone, of being responsible for their own balance, that they truly learn to ride. Perhaps the departure of this ancient civilization was that moment, on a planetary scale. It was the moment the hand let go of the bicycle seat. Suddenly, we were on our own. There was no one to show us how to build a better tool. There was no one to explain the stars. There was no one to save us from droughts or ice ages. If we wanted to survive, if we wanted to understand, we had to figure it out for ourselves. And doesn't that feel true to you? When you look at humanity, what do you see? You see a fierce, almost stubborn independence, a relentless curiosity, a species that is defined by its drive to innovate, to push boundaries, to climb the next mountain just to see what's on the other side. We are the species that looks at an impossible problem and says, "Give us a minute, we'll figure it out." Could that defining trait, that core of our character, be the direct result of being left behind? Is our ambition the echo of their absence? It's a powerful thought. That in this version of the story, their greatest gift to us wasn't something they gave us, but something they took away. They took away the safety net. They took away the guiding hand. And in doing so, they gave us the one thing we needed to become who we are today, the freedom to fall, and the necessity to learn how to get back up on our own. We didn't just inherit the earth, we had to earn it, because there was no one else left to claim it. So, one possibility is that our entire history is shaped by their absence. That the vacuum they left created the pressure for us to evolve the way we did. That's one ripple. But there's another way to think about it. And it is just as compelling. What if their departure wasn't a clean break? What if, in leaving, they didn't just create a vacuum, but also left? Not grand cities or obvious monuments, which we know would turn to dust in a few million years, but small things. Subtle things. The kind of things you might lose when you're packing up an entire world. This is the second ripple. The idea that their leftover technology, discovered by chance millennia later, might have kick-started our own progress. The quiet gift of a forgotten tool that reappeared at just the right time, changing our destiny forever. It's a causal chain stretching across eons. Imagine a group of our early ancestors huddled in a cave. Their world is stone, wood, and bone. They know how to knap flint. They know how to sharpen a stick. That is the limit of their technological universe. Then one day, while digging for roots, they find something. It is not a rock. It is smooth, dark, and impossibly hard. It is a small piece of wreckage. A fragment of an alloy from the departed civilization's technology. They do not understand it. They cannot replicate it. To them, it is a magical stone from the gods. But they discover that this one strange rock can be sharpened to an edge that never dulls. It can cut through wood and bone in a way that their flint tools never could. It is a small advantage. But small advantages are how evolution works. That one tool allows that one tribe to become more efficient hunters, more skilled builders. Their population grows. They thrive. And the story is passed down. The story of the magical stone from the sky. Now, jump forward thousands of years. Humanity is on the verge of the Bronze Age. We've learned to smelt copper and tin, but we're struggling to reach higher temperatures for stronger metals. Then, a prospector, high in the mountains, stumbles upon the remains of an ancient mining operation. It is not a human mine. The geology is all wrong. And in the discarded slag, he finds trace elements, a strange combination of materials that, when added to his own smelter, allow his furnace to burn hotter than ever before. He doesn't know why it works. He just knows that it does. He has just discovered the secret to making steel, 10,000 years ahead of schedule. He hasn't rediscovered their technology, but he has stumbled upon its ghost, its chemical echo. You see how this chain might work? It's not about finding a schematic for a starship. It is subtler. It is the discovery of a strange property in a forgotten place. A piece of a long-dead power cell that shows us the principle of the battery. An impossibly precise carving on a buried stone that reveals a mathematical constant we hadn't yet discovered. Each discovery is a little nudge. A little course correction in our technological journey. It's a causal chain, where their departure is the first link, the leftover fragment is the second, its discovery is the third, and the resulting innovation becomes the fourth, which then allows for the fifth, and so on, all the way to the screen you are watching this on right now. All the way to the screen you are watching this on right now. So, in this view, we weren't just shaped by their absence. We were also guided, in a strange indirect way, by the breadcrumbs they left behind. It is not the story of a parent letting go of the bike. It is the story of a child learning to ride on their own. But every so often they find a strange, perfectly made gear, or a perfectly inflated tire, just lying on the path, right when they need it most. They do not know where it came from, but it helps them on their journey. These two ideas, the vacuum and the echo, do not have to be separate. In fact, they work together beautifully. The departure creates the vacuum, the desperate need for humanity to innovate and survive on its own. It forced us to stand up. But the echoes, the leftover technological ghosts, provided the occasional and mysterious ninj. They were the sparks of insight, the impossible artifacts that pushed us in new directions whenever we stumbled upon them. It's a picture of humanity that is both profoundly lonely and deeply connected. We are the self-made children who had to raise ourselves in an empty house. But we are also the inheritors of a vast and secret legacy, a legacy we do not even know we have, found in the strange objects we occasionally find in the attic. It means our fierce independence is our own. But the path we walked might have been gently illuminated by lanterns left behind, long, long ago. We are a paradox. We are cosmic orphans, but we are also the unknowing heirs to a lost kingdom. This entire chain of cause and effect, this cosmic butterfly effect, paints a fascinating picture of our own development. It gives us a new story for ourselves, one that stretches back into the deep past, long before we were even human. But it all hinges on that one monumental event at the very beginning. It all comes back to that first stone dropped in the pond. And so, it forces us to ask the most important question of all. Why? Why would a civilization that had mastered their world, that had presumably solved the great problems of existence, choose to leave it all behind? Why? Why? Why would a civilization that had mastered their world, that had presumably solved the great problems of existence, choose to leave it all behind? We often imagine grand, noble reasons. A cosmic calling, a desire to spread life throughout the galaxy, the ultimate expression of an exploratory spirit. These are beautiful thoughts. They paint a picture of a species that had outgrown its cradle and was ready to walk amongst the stars. But what if the reason wasn't beautiful at all? What if it wasn't a choice born from ambition, but a decision forced by desperation? What if the most powerful motivator in the universe isn't hope, but survival? Let's gently set aside the idea of a glorious departure and consider a much more sobering possibility. That this ancient civilization didn't just leave Earth. They fled it. The threat they faced probably wasn't a sudden cinematic catastrophe. An asteroid is a clean, simple villain. It arrives, it strikes, the story is over. No, the most terrifying threats, the ones that truly test a civilization, are the slow ones. The ones that creep up on you over generations. The ones you can see coming from a long, long way off, like a storm cloud on the distant horizon that just grows larger and darker with each passing year. Imagine a world, not unlike our own, basking in the light of its own technological brilliance. A society that had bent the planet to its will, built magnificent structures, and commanded energies on a scale we can barely dream of. But every fire casts a shadow. Every action has a consequence. Perhaps the very energies that powered their golden age were slowly, imperceptibly, poisoning their home. It would have started quietly. A shift in the weather patterns. A species of plant that no longer grew in its ancestral home. A change in the chemistry of the oceans, subtle at first, then more pronounced. The scientists would have been the first to notice. They would have raised the alarm, pointing to charts and graphs, speaking of trends and projections. And just like us, they probably would have been met with skepticism. It is so hard to see a threat that isn't immediate. It is hard to convince people to make sacrifices today for a tomorrow that's 50, or 100, or 500 years away. The problem would have seemed abstract, a concern for their great-grandchildren. Though they debated. They formed committees. They argued about the cost of action versus the cost of inaction. For generations, perhaps, they lived in this state of suspended animation, perfectly aware of the slow-motion disaster unfolding around them, yet unable to muster the collective will to stop it. They were, in all likelihood, far more advanced than we are. They surely tried to fix it. They must have deployed incredible technologies, great machines to scrub the atmosphere, complex biological agents to heal the seas. They would have thrown all their genius at the problem. But some systems, once broken, cannot be easily mended. A planet's climate isn't a machine you can simply turn off and on again. It is a vast, interconnected web of life and chemistry. There are tipping points. Points of no return. It's like knowing a slow-motion flood is coming for your town. Not a tidal wave, but a gradual, relentless rise in the water level, inch by inch, year by year. For a long time, you believe you can manage it. You build levees, you raise the foundations of your homes. You put your faith in your engineering. But then comes a day when you get the final report. The models are certain. The levees will not hold forever. The water will keep rising. The town is going to be lost. At that moment, your entire perspective shifts. You stop thinking about how to save the town. You start thinking about how to save the people. You stop building walls, and you start building a boat. A boat big enough for everyone and everything you cherish. This ancient civilization reached that moment. The day their best and brightest minds concluded, with a certainty that must have been heartbreaking, that their world was past its tipping point. They had lost the war. Their technology wasn't powerful enough to save their home, but perhaps it was powerful enough to build them a new one. Their only choice was to build an ark. Not an ark for animals, 2 by 2, but a cultural ark. A vessel to carry their knowledge, their art, their history, their very soul, across the dark ocean of space. So, their grand departure, the event we might mistake for a glorious adventure, was in reality a planetary evacuation. A desperate, last-ditch effort to survive. They weren't explorers, joyfully setting out to see the universe. They were refugees, taking one last, sad look at the home they could no longer save. Now, this is a compelling story. It feels tragic and human. But does it connect to anything in our world? Is it just a story, or could there be a whisper of it in the earth itself? Our planet keeps a diary, written in layers of rock and ice. Geologists and paleoclimatologists can read this diary, going back hundreds of millions of years. And what it tells us is that Earth's climate is not inherently stable. It has gone through periods of extreme change, violent shifts from hothouse worlds to snowball ice ages. We know about many of these events. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, or PTM, around 56 million years ago, saw global temperatures soar in a geological blink of an eye. The Great Dying, at the end of the Permian period, was the most severe extinction event known, wiping out over 90% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial life, linked to massive volcanic eruptions that choke the atmosphere. We study these events, and we assign them natural causes. Asteroid impacts, supervolcanoes, shifts in the Earth's orbit. We look at the evidence, the strange isotopic ratios in certain geological layers, the sudden disappearance of fossils, and we construct a narrative based on what we know of the natural world. But here's the quiet, unsettling question our theory poses. What if one of them wasn't natural? We are searching for artifacts of a lost civilization in the wrong places. We look for buried cities and fallen monuments. But any such structure would be ground to dust in a few million years by the relentless churn of plate tectonics and erosion. A civilization that advanced wouldn't leave behind a pot or a building. They would leave behind a scar on the planet itself. The true out-of-place artifact might not be a small metal sphere, but an entire geological epoch that doesn't quite add up. What if one of those ancient, massive carbon spikes we see in the ice cores wasn't from a volcano, but from their industrial age? What if a mysterious extinction event wasn't from an asteroid, but from the cascading ecological collapse they failed to prevent? We would look at that data today, and of course, we would search for a natural explanation, because the alternative is simply too fantastic to consider. It's like detectives arriving at the scene of a house fire. They see the ash and the embers, and they logically conclude there was a faulty wire or a lightning strike. They would never assume the original owners, 100,000 years ago, built a rocket in the basement and used the fire to cover their tracks. The evidence of departure would be completely masked by the evidence of destruction. And this is where their story stops being about the distant past and becomes a haunting reflection of our own present. Think of the challenges they would have faced. The denial, the political inertia, the economic arguments against change. The short-term thinking that always seems to win out over long-term preservation. Does any of that sound familiar? Their story is a cautionary tale, written on a planetary scale. It suggests that a species can be brilliant enough to reach for the stars, but still foolish enough to foul its own nest beyond repair. It's a reminder that intelligence and wisdom are two very different things. Intelligence gives you the power to change your environment. Wisdom gives you the self-control not to. By reframing their exodus as an escape, we see them in a new light. They weren't gods descending from the heavens. They were the world's first climate refugees. Their journey to the stars wasn't a pilgrimage, it was a retreat. The great silence in the cosmos might not be the sound of an empty universe, but the quiet echo of a home that was abandoned, a warning left behind for the next tenants. They made the ultimate journey, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. They packed up their entire world, all their hopes and memories, and launched themselves into the cold and the dark, driven by the oldest impulse of all, the simple, desperate need for a future. And in doing so, they undertook a challenge of logistics and engineering so immense, it's almost impossible to comprehend. The challenge of packing for a million-year trip. And in doing so, they undertook a challenge of logistics and engineering so immense, it's almost impossible to comprehend. The challenge of packing for a million-year trip. It's a phrase that's easy to say, but if you really stop and think about it, the idea starts to buckle under its own weight. We think about packing for a week-long vacation, and it can be a chore. Now, imagine packing for a journey that will outlast your entire civilization's recorded history. A journey where there is no destination, only the voyage itself. You are not just packing clothes and supplies. You are packing a world. The first, most obvious problem is the vessel itself. We call it a generation ship, and that's a good name for it. It's a ship designed to house not just one crew, but generations of them. The people who arrive at their destination, if they ever do, would be the distant descendants of those who left. It is a concept that feels like pure science fiction, but the practicalities are rooted in very basic biology and physics. This isn't a ship in the way we think of one. It is a world unto itself. It couldn't just be a sterile metal container. It would have to be a fully functioning, self-contained ecosystem. Think of it less like a submarine and more like a sealed terrarium, a perfect bubble of life floating in the absolute sterility of space. It would need vast fields for agriculture, not just to grow food, but to recycle the air. It would need forests, oceans, and a complex web of bacteria and insects. Every drop of water would need to be captured, purified, and reused, endlessly. Every nutrient, every molecule of breathable air would be part of a closed loop, a cycle that could not be broken. Breaking that cycle, even for a short time, would mean the end of everything. We've seen tiny versions of this idea in our own science. Biosphere 2, in Arizona, was a famous attempt to create a closed, ecological system. It was an incredible experiment, but it also taught us how fantastically difficult it is. They struggled with fluctuating oxygen levels, with runaway vine growth, with the subtle chemistry of a living world that we still do not fully understand. Now, imagine having to get it right, perfectly, on your first try. And it has to stay perfect not for 2 years, but for 20,000. Or 100,000. So you can see why calling it a ship doesn't quite do it justice. It is a hollowed-out planet, a tiny Earth set adrift. The sheer amount of material needed to build such a thing is staggering. You'd be disassembling mountains, diverting whole rivers of resources. It would be the single greatest undertaking in the history of the planet. But let's say they did it. They built this colossal vessel, this self-sustaining ark. A world is nothing without its inhabitants. And that brings us to the next, even more complex question: who gets to go? This isn't just a simple matter of a lottery. You cannot just pick names out of a hat when the future of your species is at stake. The decision would be a brutal, heartbreaking calculus of survival. First, you'd need genetic diversity. To avoid the problems of a limited gene pool over thousands of generations, you'd need a population of at least several thousand, and ideally tens of thousands of individuals who are as genetically distinct as possible. It's a cold, biological necessity. The ark would have to be a microcosm of the entire species' genetic library. But it goes so far beyond that. You wouldn't just be preserving a species, you'd be preserving a civilization. That means you need skills. Of course, you need your engineers, your doctors, your farmers, your biologists. The people who keep the lights on and the air breathable. But what about the rest? What about the artists? The musicians, the historians, the storytellers, the philosophers? Do you bring a poet on a journey of pure survival? Do you give a precious spot to a sculptor? The answer has to be yes. Because without art, without stories, without a connection to the culture that launched you into the darkness, you eventually forget why you are on the journey in the first place. After a few generations born in the perpetual twilight of the ship, Earth would become a myth. The reasons for the voyage would fade into legend. It's the culture, the art, the history that keeps the mission alive. It's the soul of the ark. So you're not just choosing a crew. You are curating a civilization. A perfectly balanced slice of a whole world designed to be transplanted. Every single person would have a purpose, not just for their own lifetime, but as a link in a chain that stretches across millennia. It's like casting the most important play ever written, one that will run for 10,000 years, and every actor needs to be perfect. The whole idea feels impossibly grand, doesn't it? A project of such scale and ambition that it is hard to believe any civilization could pull it off. And yet, when we look into our own past, we see echoes of this same spirit. We see precedents for these seemingly impossible journeys, undertaken with technology that seems impossibly primitive to us now. The scale was different, of course, but the courage, the sheer, stubborn determination, that was exactly the same. Think about the Polynesian navigators. Thousands of years ago, they set out from Southeast Asia in double-hulled canoes, sailing into the vast, blue emptiness of the Pacific Ocean. They were exploring the largest, most empty space on our planet. They had no compasses, no GPS, no satellite weather forecasts. The islands they were looking for were tiny specks of land separated by thousands of miles of open, often violent, ocean. Hitting one was like trying to find a single grain of sand on a football field. So how did they do it? They used a form of science that was so deeply connected to their environment, it was almost invisible. They read the stars, yes, but they did more than that. They could feel the rhythm of the ocean swells, the subtle changes in wave patterns that told them a distant island was disrupting the current long before they could see it. They followed the flight paths of birds, knowing they had to be nesting on land. They read the colors of the water and the shapes of the clouds. Their canoe was their generation ship. It carried their families, their food, their plants, and their culture. Many surely set out and were never seen again, lost to the immense blue desert. But some made it. They found Hawaii. They found Easter Island. They found New Zealand. They populated a third of our planet this way. They were undertaking an impossible journey. And they succeeded. They showed that the motivation to find a new home, to push out beyond the horizon, is one of the most powerful forces in our history. The technology changes, but that fundamental spirit doesn't. Or think of the age of discovery in Europe, just a few hundred years ago. Men climbed aboard small, creaking wooden ships to sail off the edge of the known map. They had no real idea what was out there. For all they knew, the myths of sea monsters were true. They were ravaged by disease, starved by failed supplies, and battered by storms. Their ships were tiny, fragile bubbles of civilization, much like a starship would be. The risks were astronomical. The chance of not coming back was terrifyingly high. But they went anyway. Driven by a mix of greed, glory, and genuine curiosity, they pushed into the unknown. They redefined the world. These moments in our own history, they act like small, scale models of the great departure we are imagining. They prove the principle. They show us that when the motivation is strong enough, whether it's survival, or curiosity, or just the idea that a better home might be waiting over the horizon, we are capable of undertaking journeys that seem utterly impossible. Our hypothetical ancestors, this ancient civilization, would have faced the same fundamental choice. The ocean of space is infinitely larger and more hostile than the Pacific, their journey infinitely longer. Their technology would have to be more advanced than we can currently imagine. But the core decision, the spirit required to make it, we've seen that before. We see it in the eyes of every explorer who has ever stood at the edge of the known world and decided to take that first step into the unknown. It's the same quiet determination. It is the spirit that allows you to look at your entire world, everything you've ever known, everything your people have ever built, and make the cold, calculated decision to leave it all behind. Not just to leave it, but to carefully disassemble it, choose the most important pieces, and pack it all into a suitcase for a journey with no guaranteed return. It's the ultimate act of faith, not in a deity, but in your own descendants. A belief that the seed of your civilization, carefully planted and protected, can survive the longest of winters and one day find new soil in which to grow. It's the ultimate act of faith, not in a deity, but in your own descendants. A belief that the seed of your civilization, carefully planted and protected, can survive the longest of winters and one day find new soil in which to grow. But this incredible story we've been exploring, this grand idea of a predecessor civilization packing up and heading for the stars, it's not a new thought. It's an idea that seems to bubble up from our collective imagination every now and then. But what's fascinating is that it never quite tells the same story twice. The story changes. It adapts. It's almost like it is a living thing, an idea that breathes in the air of its time and exhales a tale that perfectly reflects the hopes and fears of the people telling it. The way we imagine this ancient departure, the motives we give our predecessors, the feelings we associate with their journey, all of it says far more about Guj than it could ever say about them. It is a mirror, and looking at how the reflection has changed over the decades is a journey in itself. Let's go back a little, to a time of incredible optimism. Picture the 1960s and 70s. The world was gripped by the space race. We were watching, live on our televisions, as human beings took their first steps onto the surface of the moon. The future didn't just feel bright, it felt like it was right around the corner. We were reaching for the stars, and it seemed perfectly natural to imagine that someone, long ago, might have reached back. This is the era that gave birth to the modern ancient astronaut theory. You've probably heard of the book that became a global phenomenon, Erich von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods. Now, regardless of what you think of the evidence presented in the book, its cultural impact was enormous. It perfectly captured the spirit of the age. And in that version of the story, the beings who visited Earth in our distant past weren't just visitors. They were teachers. They were benevolent, wise, and parental. The story went that they descended from the heavens and gifted early humanity with the building blocks of civilization. They taught us mathematics and astronomy. They showed us how to build pyramids and monuments with impossible precision. They were the guiding hand that lifted us out of the darkness. In this telling, we weren't left behind. We were nurtured and then given the chance to grow on our own. It was an incredibly hopeful and comforting idea. It suggested that our intelligence, our spark, wasn't a cosmic accident, but a gift from a wiser, older relative. Think about that for a moment. In an age where we were taking our own technological baby steps into the cosmos, we told ourselves a story about a cosmic parent who had taught us how to walk. It makes perfect sense. The narrative was empowering. It framed humanity as the promising student of a brilliant teacher. The universe wasn't cold and empty. It was a classroom, and we had graduated with honors. But time moves on, and cultures change. The initial, breathless excitement of the Apollo era began to fade. The world started to feel a lot more complicated. We went through energy crises, Cold War paranoia, and a growing awareness of the damage we were doing to our own planet. Our faith in technology as a purely benevolent force began to wobble. And as our own anxieties shifted, so did the story. The reflection in the mirror began to darken. As we grew more cynical, the stories about our cosmic ancestors shifted right along with us. They stopped being the simple, benevolent teachers of the 60s. Their motives became murky, unclear. The new stories were filled with a sense of mystery and even dread. The beings who came before were no longer just wise mentors. They were something else entirely. Something we couldn't quite understand. Suddenly, the questions changed. It wasn't what wonderful gifts did they bring us anymore. It was what were they doing here in the first place? Or, even more chillingly, what were they running from? The story became a warning, not a comforting bedtime story. Maybe their abandoned artifacts weren't gifts, but dangerous tools we were too primitive to understand. Maybe their departure wasn't a proud parent watching their child ride a bike for the first time, but a frantic escape from a disaster they saw coming, a disaster that might still be on its way. This whole process reminds me of looking through old family photo albums. You know the feeling. You look at a picture from the 70s, and it's not just the people you see. You see the era in the faded colors, the hairstyles, the cut of the clothes. Then you flip to a photo from the 90s, and the feeling is completely different. The people might be the same, but the world around them has changed, and you can see it in the photograph. The story of our cosmic ancestors is just like that. The basic idea stays the same, but the details, the mood, the emotional color, that all tells you the story of the era it was imagined in. This brings us to more recent times, where our anxieties have become even more complex. We are now grappling with things like genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and the very real possibility of creating life or consciousness ourselves. We understand, in a way previous generations couldn't, that the act of creation can have terrifying and unpredictable consequences. And so, the story evolved again. Think of a film like Prometheus. Here, the ancient visitors, the engineers, are not just teachers. They are our literal creators. They designed our DNA. We are, in the most direct sense, their children. But this is not a happy family reunion. These creators are not loving parents. They are powerful, seemingly capricious, and for reasons we cannot comprehend, they decided their experiment, this was a failure, and set out to erase it. This is the ultimate expression of our modern fears. It is the story of a child meeting their parent, only to find out that the parent regrets ever having them. It taps into our deepest anxieties about our own creations. What if the AI soul we build turns against us? What if the life we engineer in a lab sees us as obsolete? The story of the engineers is a story about the terrifying, unpredictable power of a creator, told by a culture that is just now learning how to become one itself. Do you see the journey we've been on? We've gone from the hopeful tale of wise teachers lifting us up, to the deeply unsettling story of creator gods who wanted to wipe us out. The fundamental idea of a past visitor hasn't changed, but the meaning we pour into that idea has transformed completely. The mirror is showing us a very different reflection now than it did 50 years ago. It seems we are no longer looking for a gentle guide. We are bracing for a complex and possibly dangerous encounter, and that expectation reveals our own unease with the power we now wield. So what this all comes down to is a simple, powerful truth. The evolving story of a precursor civilization is never really about them. It's about us. It is a grand, cosmic projection screen where we play out the drama of our own times. When we felt bold, optimistic, and proud of our technological leap into space, we imagined a predecessor who was a benevolent version of that same ideal. They were the ultimate engineers and scientists, and they gave us their blessing. They were a confirmation that our path was the right one. But when we started to feel anxious about the consequences of our technology, about nuclear proliferation, about environmental collapse, we imagined a predecessor who was also dealing with crisis. Their story became a cautionary tale. Their departure wasn't an act of grace, it was an act of desperation. Their story became a warning about the path we were on. And today, as we stand on the verge of godlike technologies, like genetic editing and artificial intelligence, we tell ourselves a story about creators who are powerful, unpredictable, and whose motives are terrifyingly alien. We are wrestling with the ethics and dangers of our own power. So we imagine a creator who embodies that same volatile potential. Our hopes will always become their motivations. Our deepest fears will always become their backstory. This doesn't make the thought experiment any less profound. In fact, it makes it even more valuable. It acts as a kind of cultural barometer, a story we tell ourselves to measure our own psychological weather. It's a myth in the truest sense of the word, not a story that's false, but a story that carries a deeper truth about the people who tell it. It is a beautiful, flexible narrative. We can pour anything into it. It can be a story of hope, a story of loss, a story of warning, or a story of mystery. And by seeing how we choose to tell it, we learn something vital about our own place in history. We see our own reflection, not in a pool of water, but in the vast, silent emptiness between the stars. The story itself is a kind of generation ship, a vessel we rebuild decade after decade, to carry the precious cargo of our current hopes and fears across time. In the end, it might just be the most human story of all. Not because it tells us about aliens, but because it tells us so very clearly about, in the end, it might just be the most human story of all. Not because it tells us about aliens, but because it tells us so very clearly about ourselves. And that brings us to the very heart of this entire journey. Beyond the strange artifacts, beyond the myths and the silence in the stars, there's a much simpler, much more personal question we need to ask. Why? Why do we want this story to be true? Think about it. We've spent this time exploring a grand cosmic speculation. A civilization that rose, built wonders, and then vanished into the sky, leaving us behind. It's a fascinating idea, a wonderful puzzle for the mind. But for many of us, it feels like more than that. It resonates on a deeper level. It feels important. This isn't just a thought experiment. For a lot of people, it's a kind of hope. A quiet wish whispered to the night sky. And to understand that, we have to look inward. We have to look at the psychology that underpins our entire relationship with the cosmos. The truth is, the story of a precursor civilization that escaped Earth isn't really a theory about the past. It is a story about our feelings in the present. It is about a deep, fundamental human need, the desire not to be alone. Imagine you are a small child who has woken up in the middle of the night. You are in a huge old house. It's completely dark, and it's completely quiet. The kind of quiet that feels heavy. You can hear your own heartbeat in your ears. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside the window, sounds like a footstep. It sounds like something moving in the shadows. In that moment, what's the most terrifying thought you can have? It's the thought that you are completely and utterly alone in that house. And what's the most comforting thought? It is the memory that your parents are just down the hall. Even if they are asleep, even if you cannot see them, just knowing they are there changes everything. The creaks in the floorboards become familiar again. The darkness feels less like a threat and more like a blanket. The silence is no longer empty. It is peaceful. The fear is gone because you know you aren't alone. You belong to a family that is sleeping under the same roof. Now let's scale that feeling up. To the size of a planet. To the size of a galaxy. We, humanity, are that child who has woken up in the middle of the night. We find ourselves in this vast, ancient, and profoundly quiet cosmic house. We've been awake for a little while now, scientifically speaking. We've turned on a few lights with our science and our reason. We've peered down the long dark hallways with our telescopes. And all we hear is silence. The great cosmic silence. That silence can be terrifying. It can make us feel incredibly small, incredibly fragile, and impossibly alone. It can lead us to the chilling conclusion that we are the only child in this incomprehensibly vast house. That our existence, our art, our love, our struggles, are just a tiny momentary flicker of light in an eternal uncaring darkness. a cosmic accident with no meaning beyond what we create for ourselves. And so, we tell ourselves a story. It's a story to comfort us in the dark. A story that says, you're not alone. You were never alone. The story of a precursor civilization is the sound of parents sleeping just down the hall. It suggests that the silence we hear isn't the silence of absence, but the quiet of a house after the adults have gone to bed. Or, in this case, a house after the elders have moved on. This idea transforms our entire perception of our place in the universe. Suddenly, we aren't a cosmic accident. We are part of a lineage. We are inheritors. It feels so much less lonely to think of ourselves as the children left behind than as the only child there ever was. It reframes our entire existence. We are no longer a random anomaly. We are the next chapter in a story that began long before we were born. The comfort in this is immense. It gives us roots that stretch back into deep time, into an epoch before our own. It tells us that intelligent, feeling, creative life is not a one-time fluke. It has happened before. And if it happened before, it means we belong here. We are a natural part of the universe's unfolding, just like the formation of stars and planets. We are not the cosmic oddity. We are the continuation. This is a profoundly powerful shift in perspective. To be the only one carries a terrible burden of loneliness. But to be the next one carries a legacy. It implies a connection, a history. Think of it like this. There's a deep curiosity that many adopted children feel about their biological parents. This curiosity isn't a rejection of the loving family that raised them. It is not about dissatisfaction with their present life. It is about a fundamental, human need to understand one's own origin story. To know where your eyes came from, or your laugh, or your love of music. It's the desire to see your own face reflected in the past. It's a search for the opening pages of your own book. Our fascination with a cosmic parent civilization is that same impulse, written on the largest possible scale. We look out at the universe, this vast, indifferent space that is our home, and we desperately want to know our own origin story. We want to know that we came from somewhere, that we are part of something bigger. This need for a parental figure, for a guide or a predecessor, is one of an old and recurring theme in human history. It's perhaps one of the oldest stories we've ever told. Long before we imagined ancient astronauts, we imagined gods. Think of the pantheons of ancient Greece, or Egypt, or the Norse. These gods and goddesses were often described as living in the sky. They were powerful, wise, sometimes vengeful, and they were intimately involved in human affairs. They were in effect the ultimate parent figures. They provided explanations for the world, they gave moral guidance, and most importantly, they assured us that someone was in charge. They put a human-like face on the terrifying, chaotic forces of nature. A thunderstorm wasn't just a random atmospheric discharge, it was the anger of Zeus or Thor. A good harvest wasn't just lucky weather, it was a blessing from Demeter. These stories made the universe feel less random. They made it feel like a family. A complicated, dramatic, and often dysfunctional family for sure, but a family nonetheless. And that was infinitely more comforting than the alternative of a cold, meaningless world governed by chance. As science began to provide new explanations for the universe, our stories adapted. The gods of the sky slowly transformed. In the 20th century, with the dawn of the space age, they became the wise, benevolent aliens of science fiction. Think of characters like Klaatu, in The Day the Earth Stood Still, who came to Earth not to conquer, but to warn us, to guide us, to act like a concerned parent telling their reckless children to behave. The ancient astronaut theory, that became popular in the 60s and 70s is just another evolution of this same deep-seated story. It took the gods of old and recast them as technologically advanced beings. It wasn't magic that built the pyramids, it was advanced engineering. It wasn't a deity who ascended to heaven on a cloud, it was a being leaving in a spacecraft. But the underlying emotional need remains exactly the same. Whether we call them gods, benevolent aliens, or a precursor civilization, we are telling ourselves the same comforting tale. A story that gives us a sense of place and purpose in a universe that can often feel utterly indifferent to our existence. It's a story that says, your life has meaning because it is part of a larger narrative. You are not a footnote, you are a legacy. This might be the most powerful appeal of our documentary's central idea. The thought that an ancient civilization escaped Earth doesn't just solve a cosmic paradox or explain a few weird artifacts. It soothes a deep psychological ache. It addresses our cosmic loneliness. It tells us that the great, silent house of the universe isn't empty. The elders have just moved on to a different part of the cosmos, leaving the ancestral home to us, the next generation. And so, we look for them. We search for clues in our myths, for footprints in our geology, for echoes in our own DNA. We are searching for our cosmic parents. We are looking for proof that we are not alone, that we were never alone, and that we have a family somewhere out there among the stars. It is a vulnerable feeling, isn't it? To admit that we might feel like children in the dark. But acknowledging that feeling is key to understanding why these stories have such a powerful hold on our imagination. It is not about being unscientific or foolish. It is about being human. It is about a longing for connection that is as vast as the universe itself. But this idea of being the children left behind, of inheriting this world, raises another, deeper question. If they left, and we stayed, what does that make Earth? A gift? A cradle we were meant to outgrow? Or is it something more? What truly defines a home planet? Or is it something more? What truly defines a home planet? It's a simple question, but it sits at the very center of our identity. When you think of the word home, what comes to mind? Maybe it is the walls of a house, the smell of a certain food cooking, the view from a window. But if you dig a little deeper, it is usually something less tangible. It is a feeling of safety, a sense of belonging. It is the place where your story began. For all of us, for every human who has ever lived, that story starts here. On Earth. Our languages, our biology, our myths, they are all soaked in the essence of this planet. We are creatures of gravity and seasons, of blue skies and deep oceans. We carry the chemical signature of this world in our very bones. But what if that connection could be severed? Let's imagine the journey of our ancient predecessors. Not the departure, but the voyage itself. A few generations pass. Then a dozen. Then 100. A child is born of a great ship, 1,000 years out from a world they have never seen. Their sky isn't blue, it's the star-dusted black of the cosmos, viewed through reinforced glass. Their ground isn't soil, it is the vibrating deck plates of the Ark. The sound of rain is a simulation. The idea of an ocean is a legend, a story told about a mythical planet-wide body of water. Now, ask that child where they are from. Will they say Earth? A place that, to them, is just a collection of data in a historical archive? A pale blue dot in a star chart from a bygone era? Or will they say the name of their ship? The Star Drifter. The Odyssey. The only home they have ever known. Is Earth still their home planet? And perhaps the more unsettling question, are they still human in the same way we are? This is where the story of their departure forces us to look in the mirror. It brings up these deep, quiet questions of identity, of legacy, and of transience. A civilization that leaves its homeworld must by necessity redefine itself. It is not a choice, it is an inevitable consequence of the journey. Their culture, once rooted in the soil of Earth, would slowly, generation by generation, become a culture of the ship. Think about it in a way we can understand. It's like someone who moves to a new country as a young child. They might retain some of the heritage from their birthplace, a few words of the old language, a taste for certain foods. But their identity, their fundamental sense of self, is shaped by their new home. They grow up with new friends, new customs, a new landscape. After a few generations, the old country isn't a memory anymore. It is just a story their grandparents tell. A distant place on a map. For the travelers on that ancient ark, the shift would be 1,000 times more profound. Their entire reality would change. Words that are fundamental to us would become archaic for them. Think of a word like mountain. For us, it conjures images of stone and snow, of vastness and permanence. For a child on the ship, what would it mean? It would be a word from a fairy tale, a concept as abstract as a griffin or a phoenix. Their language would evolve to describe their world. New words for the hum of the life support system, the subtle shifts in the recycled atmosphere, the different qualities of light from distant alien suns. Their art would change. How could they paint a landscape they've never seen? Their canvases would be filled with the things they knew, the intricate lattice work of the ship's interior, the portraits of their fellow travelers, the breathtaking, terrifying beauty of a nebula blooming in the void. Their music would echo not with the sounds of wind and birdsong, but with the rhythmic pulse of the engines and the deep, silent hum of space itself. It is a beautiful and slightly sad thought, isn't it? That an entire culture would slowly untether itself from its origin. They would stop being earthborn and would simply become the travelers. Their identity would no longer be about where they came from, but about where they were going. This forces us to ask a really fundamental question about ourselves. What parts of our own humanity are intrinsically tied to this specific ball of rock, and what parts are truly portable? What is the essential US that we could pack up and carry with us to the stars? If you strip away the mountains and the oceans, the seasons and the sky, what's left? You might find that the most important things are the ones that take up no space at all. Our ability to tell stories, our capacity for love, and our experience of grief. Our curiosity, that relentless engine that drives us to ask, what if? Our art, our music, our mathematics, these aren't things that belong to Earth. They belong to consciousness. They are the portable parts of our identity. That's the luggage that truly matters. The software, not the hardware. Perhaps this ancient civilization understood that. They knew that to survive, they couldn't just transport their bodies, they had to transport their soul. And the soul of a species is in its culture, its knowledge, and its collective memory. Their story, then, is a lesson in letting go. They had to let go of their planet. They had to let go of the idea of a permanent home. Their entire existence became about motion, about the journey. The ship wasn't just a vehicle to get from point A to point B. The ship was seen, the destination. Living, surviving, and carrying the memory forward, was the purpose. After centuries, then millennia, Earth itself would transform within their culture. It would move from history into myth. It would become their Garden of Eden, a perfect, lost paradise from which they were exiled. Or maybe, depending on why they left, it would become a cautionary tale. A story of a home that was beautiful but fragile. A paradise that was squandered. The story would be a vital part of their identity, but the physical planet would be gone, absorbed into the realm of legend. This idea has a strange calming effect. It places our own existence into a much larger context. We tend to think of ourselves as the pinnacle of Earth's story, the permanent residence. But this imagined history of a predecessor suggests something else. It suggests that a planet might just be a starting point, a cradle, and that no cradle is meant to be lived in forever. It reframes our relationship with our own world. We are not masters of this planet, we are its children. And like any child, there may come a day when we have to pack our most cherished things, our stories, our songs, our love for one another, and quietly continue the journey on our own. So what is a home planet? Maybe it is not about the soil under your feet or the specific star you orbit. Maybe it is just the first chapter in a much, much longer book. The place where a species learns what it means to be itself before it has the courage to see what else it might become. The real home, the one you never leave, is the culture you build and the identity you carry inside you. It is the only thing that can truly survive a journey across the stars. And maybe we are starting to learn that lesson ourselves in ways those ancient travelers could never have imagined. It is the only thing that can truly survive a journey across the stars. And maybe we are starting to learn that lesson ourselves in ways those ancient travelers could never have imagined. Think about it for a moment. What does it mean to leave a place? For most of human history, it meant a physical act. You packed your belongings, you walked, or you sailed, and your body arrived somewhere new. The journey was measured in miles, in landscapes crossed, in sunrises seen from a new shore. That has always been the template for our great stories of exploration and escape. A physical body moving through physical space. But what if that's an outdated idea? What if, right now, humanity is in the middle of the single largest migration in its history, and most of us haven't even packed a bag? We often talk about our future in space as this grand, physical endeavor. We see rockets from SpaceX and Blue Origin lifting off, carrying a handful of people to the edge of the atmosphere, and we think, that's it. That's the next great journey. And it is. It is a monumental achievement. It's the literal interpretation of the dream to leave, the same dream our hypothetical ancient civilization might have had. It's the building of a physical ark, piece by gleaming piece. But there's another ark being built. It's a second exodus happening in parallel, and it's moving infinitely faster and carrying billions more people. This journey isn't outward, into the blackness of space. It is inward, into the luminous, non-physical reality we've built behind our screens. Maybe we are already practicing for our own departure. Think about your average day. Where do you really arrive at? You might wake up in your physical home, but you reach for your phone. You check in with friends who live hundreds of miles away. You go to work, but your office might just be a laptop at the kitchen table, your colleagues existing as faces in little boxes on a screen. You relax in the evening, not by strolling through a town square, but by wandering through the vast libraries of Netflix or YouTube, or exploring the sprawling, imagined landscapes of a video game. So much of our lives, our work, our friendships, our entertainment, our very identities, are now lived in a non-physical space. It's a world made not of atoms, but of light and information. A world that exists everywhere and nowhere at the same time. This isn't a future prediction. It's a description of right now. We've built a second world, a digital continent, and we are colonizing it at a breathtaking pace. The literal space race is about sending our bodies to other planets. That's a slow, expensive, and dangerous process. but the metaphorical escape into the digital realm. That's happening on a scale that dwarfs any physical migration in history. It doesn't require a rocket, it just requires a connection. It's an exodus of consciousness itself. This shift is so profound that we barely even notice it anymore. It's like the hum of a refrigerator. It's just the background noise of modern life. But consider this. For a growing number of people, their most meaningful social interactions, their greatest professional achievements, and their deepest sense of community are found online. What does that really mean? It means we've decoupled our social and mental existence from our physical location. You can be physically isolated in a small town but mentally and socially at the heart of a bustling global community. You can be sitting alone in a room, yet in the company of thousands. It's like we've all developed a kind of superpower our ancestors could only dream of, the ability to project our minds across vast distances, to be in more than one place at once. And with this new ability, we are building a new kind of vessel. Not a generation ship made of steel, but a digital ark designed to carry something far more fundamental, ourselves. Think of your social media profile. What is it really? It's not just a collection of pictures and updates. It's a curated version of you. It's your memories, your relationships, your thoughts, all carefully assembled into a digital representation of your identity. It's a ghost of you, perfectly preserved in the machine. It's the part of you that you choose to present to the world, an avatar that lives a life parallel to your physical one. In a way, it's the first piece of luggage you pack for a journey into a non-physical reality. Now, think about online gaming and virtual worlds. This takes it a step further. Here, you do not just present an identity, you inhabit one. Your avatar isn't just a picture, it is your body in another world. It's your hands, your feet, your voice. You walk, you build, you fight, you form alliances. People have gotten married in these worlds. They've held memorials for friends who have passed away in the physical world. These are not just games, they are societies. They are fledgling civilizations being born in a digital cosmos. Each of these, our profiles, our avatars, is like a prototype for a new kind of existence. They are the early, experimental models of a digital ark. And the grand dream, the one Silicon Valley has named the metaverse, is the final design. It's the vision of a persistent, all-encompassing virtual world that exists alongside our physical one, a destination for our minds. A place to escape to. The central analogy in the outline for this is a simple one, but it is incredibly powerful. It's like a teenager who spends all their time in their bedroom. They are physically present in the house, their body is right there. But their mind, their friendships, their entire social life is happening somewhere else entirely, through the glowing portal of their screen. On a planetary scale, humanity is becoming that teenager. We are physically present on this beautiful, messy, complicated planet, but more and more, our minds and our hearts are migrating somewhere else. So the question we have to ask is, why? Why are we building this digital ark with such feverish intensity? Is it just for convenience and entertainment? Or is it something deeper? Let's go back to our ancient civilization. In our story, they left for a reason. Perhaps it was a cataclysm they couldn't stop, a climate they had broken. Their departure was an act of survival. They looked at their world, saw no future in it, and built a ship to carry them to a new one. Are we doing the same thing, just in a different way? Look at the world we live in. It's a world of immense beauty, but also one of deep anxiety. We face ecological challenges, political divisions, economic uncertainty. The physical world can often feel overwhelming, chaotic, and frighteningly fragile. It's a difficult place to live. Is it any wonder, then, that we've collectively started building a new one? A world where we have more control. A world where we can be the person we want to be. A world that we can, if we do not like it, simply turn off and on again. The digital exodus isn't just being pulled by the allure of a new frontier. It's also being pushed by the anxieties of the old one. It's an escape. A flight from the messy, unpredictable, and often painful reality of the physical world. We are building a generation ship for our consciousness, a digital vessel to carry our minds away from it all. And in doing so, we might just be echoing the journey of those who came before, in a way they could never have possibly imagined. They saw their world changing, and they built a physical lifeboat. We see our world changing, and we're building a digital one. The technology is worlds apart, separated by countless millennia, but the fundamental human, or pre-human, impulse might be exactly the same. The impulse to look at the home you've always known and think, it's time to go. It's an unsettling recognition, isn't it? To realize that our headlong rush into a virtual future might not be progress, but a repetition. A pattern. An echo of a choice made by a civilization that may have stood right where we stand now, facing their own set of intractable problems and deciding that the only solution was to leave. They aimed their ships at the stars. We are aiming our minds at the web. Both are journeys into a vast, unknown frontier, a departure from the only home we've ever known. The question is, what will we find when we get there? And what will we leave behind? The question is, what will we find when we get there? And what will we leave behind? But maybe that's not quite the right way to look at it. We've been talking about this departure as an ending. The closing of a great, mysterious chapter in Earth's history. But what if it wasn't an ending at all? What if it was an invitation? What if all this time, we've been looking at their story as a conclusion, when really, it's the beginning of our own? Their departure doesn't have to be a final, silent goodbye. It could be a trail of breadcrumbs, left for someone to find. A message in a bottle, thrown not into an ocean of water, but into the great dark ocean of time and space. And we, after all this time, are just now building a ship capable of finding it. It is a beautiful thought, isn't it? That the story isn't over. That we're not just the caretakers of a planet that was once abandoned, but perhaps the inheritors of a journey that was started long before us. We're already taking the first tentative steps. For decades, humanity has been dipping its toes into that cosmic ocean. We sent the Voyager probes, tiny golden records carrying the sounds of our world, hurtling into the interstellar void. They're our own little messages in a bottle. They're a greeting, a whisper into the darkness saying, here we are. They won't reach another star for 40,000 years, but that wasn't really the point. The point was to send them. The point was to try. And now, we are on the cusp of something more. We are seriously talking about colonies on the moon, about sending the first humans to Mars. We're becoming a multiplanetary species, not in a rush, but with a slow, steady determination that feels inevitable. Each rocket that launches, each rover that touches down on Martian soil is another step along a path. A path that leads away from our cradle. It feels like we're following an instinct we don't fully understand. A deeply ingrained drive to see what's over the next hill, or in our case, the next planet over. Maybe that instinct is our own. Or maybe, just maybe, it's a faint echo of a journey that happened before. The tools we have now are beyond anything our ancestors could have dreamed of. We've built an eye. A magnificent, golden eye, 1,000,000 miles from Earth, floating in the cold, perfect dark. The James Webb Space Telescope. It isn't just a more powerful version of the telescopes we have on Earth. It is a fundamentally different kind of observer. It sees the universe in infrared. It sees heat. It can look at a distant planet, light years away, and not just see it as a speck of light, but actually analyze the chemicals in its atmosphere. It's like being able to tell what someone is cooking for dinner just by sniffing the air from the next town over. For the first time, we are actively looking for signs of life and civilization, what scientists call technosignatures. It's a simple idea with profound implications. We are not just listening for radio signals anymore. We are looking for the clues that a technological society would leave behind. Think about our own planet. If an alien astronomer were looking at Earth from a distant star, what would they see? They'd see the light of our cities on the night side of the planet. They would analyze our atmosphere and find strange chemicals that don't belong, pollutants from our factories, things that nature wouldn't produce on its own. They might even detect the immense heat signature from our industrial centers. These are our technosignatures, the fingerprints of our civilization, visible across the vastness of space. So, we are turning that same logic outwards. We are pointing our incredible new eye at distant worlds, and we're looking for the same things. An atmosphere with a strange chemical cocktail. A planet with a weird, unnatural heat signature. Something that just doesn't fit the natural pattern. It's the cosmic version of seeing smoke on the horizon. You do not see the fire, you do not see the people who made it, but you know something is there. You've found a sign. Now, let yourself imagine that moment. A scientist, late at night, sifting through data from a distant exoplanet. It's a routine analysis, one of thousands. But then, they see something. A spike in the data where there shouldn't be one. An atmospheric composition that makes no sense. A heat pattern that looks organized. Artificial. It wouldn't be a sudden, dramatic announcement. It would be a slow-burning realization. Weeks, maybe months, of checking and rechecking the data, ruling out every possible natural explanation until only one impossible explanation is left. What if that signal, that strange fingerprint, isn't just a sign of Yanni civilization? What if it is coming from a place that seems familiar? A star system that has long been a candidate for habitable planets, a place that seems like a logical destination for a species leaving a sun like ours. What if we find the destination of that ancient voyage? Suddenly, the Fermi paradox, that great question of where is everybody, would have an answer. It would be the most profound discovery in human history. Not just the knowledge that we're not alone, but the stunning realization that we have neighbors who used to live in our house. The silence we've been listening to for so long wouldn't be a sign of absence. It would just be a sign of distance. We were listening to an empty room, not realizing the party had simply moved to a different city. And then the next question, the real question, would hang in the air for all of humanity to ponder. What do we do now? Do we go? The journey would take generations. It would require a commitment unlike any we have ever made as a species. But how could we not? It would be the ultimate archaeological dig. Not in the dust of Egypt or the jungles of the Yucatan, but in the soil of a distant world, light years from home. This is the moment their story truly becomes our story. Their departure created the mystery. Our discovery of their destination would create the mission. Think about what we might find. It's a chilling and beautiful thought experiment. Would we arrive to find them there, a civilization millions of years older, wiser, and more advanced than we can possibly imagine? What would that encounter be like? We would be like children stumbling into a library of forgotten gods. We would be the past meeting its own future. Or would we find nothing? Perhaps we'd cross that unimaginable distance, only to find a silent planet. We'd see the outlines of structures from orbit, cities that dwarf anything on Earth, arranged in patterns of breathtaking beauty and logic. We'd land, our hearts pounding in our chests, and we'd walk through the quiet streets of a perfectly preserved ghost town. We might find their libraries, filled with knowledge we couldn't yet comprehend. We might find their art, their homes, the tools they used in their daily lives. We'd find a testament to a people who successfully made the greatest journey in history, who built a new home for themselves among the stars, and then, for some unknown reason, vanished again. Maybe they moved onto another galaxy. Maybe their time simply came to an end. Or maybe they evolved into something beyond the physical, a form of consciousness we cannot perceive. In a way, that second possibility is even more profound. It would be a bittersweet discovery. A confirmation that life is not unique to Earth, but also a stark reminder that even the greatest civilizations are not eternal. We would be alone again, but in a new way. We would be alone in a universe we now know is haunted by the ghosts of our own ancestors. This is the ultimate treasure map, the one that the idea of an ancient departure hands to us. It gives us an X that marks the spot. It tells us where to look. We would no longer be shooting in the dark, pointing our telescopes at random points of light, hoping to get lucky. We would have a target, a destination, a purpose. And that purpose could change everything for us, right here on Earth. Imagine the sheer unifying force of such a discovery. In a world so often divided by lines on a map and different beliefs, we would suddenly have a common heritage that transcends all of it. We would all be, in a very real sense, the children of Earth, the ones who stayed behind. And we would all share the same goal, to follow the path, to see where it leads. It would be the greatest adventure in human history. The story would shift from a quiet, philosophical question about our past to a grand, practical question about our future. How do we build the ships? Who do we send? What do we need to learn to survive the journey? The breadcrumbs they left behind wouldn't just lead us to their new home. They would lead us into our own future. Their legacy wouldn't be in some artifact buried in the ground, but in the stars themselves, a destination hanging in our night sky, waiting. It's an invitation written in the language of physics, a challenge whispered across the light years. And the story isn't about whether we'll ever find them. It is about how the search itself will transform us. It's about our own destiny to one day become the ones who leave, the ones who pack up our culture and our memories and set out for a new shore. The silent sky begins to look different when you think of it this way. It is not empty. It's just patient, holding a secret, waiting for us to grow up, waiting for us to get curious enough to come looking. The departure wasn't an ending. It was a promise of a reunion, even if that reunion is just with their memory, their legacy, a quiet home they built for themselves, long ago and very, very far away. A quiet home they built for themselves, long ago and very, very far away. But this idea, as comforting as it might be, brings us crashing right back down to earth. It forces us to ask a very simple, very practical question. If a civilization packed up and moved out, wouldn't they have left the front door wide open? Wouldn't there be some sign of the movers? Think about what it takes for us, right now, to launch a single rocket. The noise is deafening. The ground shakes for miles. It leaves behind a massive, scorched launch pad and pumps enormous amounts of energy and chemicals into the atmosphere. It is a loud, messy, and very obvious event. Now, scale that up. Imagine you are not launching a small capsule with a few astronauts. Imagine you are launching a world. An ark carrying the population of a city, or even a nation, along with its entire ecosystem and culture. The sheer force required would be biblical. The departure of a generation ship, a planetary ark, wouldn't be a quiet affair. It would likely be the single most violent event in the planet's recent geological history. It would leave a scar, a massive crater strange magnetic anomalies, a chemical signature in the soil and ice that would be unmistakable to future geologists like us. It would be a huge planetary scale sign that says, something incredible happened here. And yet, we do not see it. The geological record is, on this particular matter, silent. So, if our story is to hold together, we have to assume this ancient civilization wasn't just advanced. We have to assume they were clever. Incredibly, unbelievably clever. They knew they would leave a mess, so they found a way to clean up after themselves. Or better yet, they found a way to leave without making a mess in the first place. This leads us to one of the most elegant and fascinating possibilities. What if the launch never happened, e.g. Earth, at all? What if, for centuries, or even millennia, they undertook the greatest construction project in history, not on the ground, but in the quiet, patient dark of space? Imagine small, routine launches. Unremarkable events, happening over and over again for 1,000 years. Ferrying up raw materials mined from asteroids, perhaps. Lifting components, one by one, into high orbit. Each launch would be insignificant on its own, a tiny blip in the atmospheric record. But slowly, piece by piece, they were building their escape route. It is like building a ship in a bottle, except the bottle is the vacuum of space, and the ship is a self-sustaining world. High above the planet, shielded from the view of anyone left on the surface, their ark took shape. A vast, silent construction site hanging in the void. There would be no single ground-shaking launch event, because the ship was never fully assembled on the ground. It was born in the environment it was destined for. This implies a level of patience that's almost difficult for us to comprehend. We build our grandest projects in years or decades. This would be a project for the ages, a plan passed down from one generation to the next. The great-great-grandchildren of the engineers who started the project would be the ones to finish it. Their entire culture would have to be oriented around this one singular goal, the Great Departure. So, you see, in this scenario, there's no giant crater to find. There's no single geological scar. The evidence would be scattered, thin, and spread out over an enormous period of time. It would be millions of tiny whispers instead of one giant shout. And whispers, as we know, are easily lost in the winds of deep time. The final moment of departure wouldn't be an earth-shattering launch from the surface. It would be a quiet, gentle push. A final silent burn in the high darkness, as their completed world finally sets sail for a distant star, leaving their home planet completely unharmed, as if they'd never been there at all. It's a clean getaway. Almost impossibly clean. But let's entertain the other side of the coin. What if they didn't need that raw, incredible power? What if orbital construction wasn't an option, and they had to launch a massive, single vessel from the planet's surface? How do you hide an event that has the power to crack a continent? The answer is as simple as it is terrifying. You hide it inside an even bigger event. You use one of the planet's own spasms of fury as the perfect smokescreen. It is the ultimate act of misdirection. A magic trick performed on a planetary stage. While everyone, and all of future history, is looking at the magician's right hand, the real trick is happening quietly in his left. Roughly 74,000 years ago, a supervolcano in what is now Indonesia erupted. We call it Toba. This wasn't just any eruption. It was one of the largest explosive events in the last 25 million years. It was so powerful, it triggered a volcanic winter that lasted for years, drastically altering the global climate and blanketing huge swaths of the planet in a thick layer of ash. The evidence of the Toba eruption is a distinct, measurable layer in the geological record all across the world. For geologists, it's a clear and unambiguous bookmark in Earth's history. Now, what if that's exactly what our departing civilization was waiting for? Imagine them, knowing their world was doomed, perhaps by their own hand, as we explored earlier. They see this catastrophe on the horizon, not just their own, but the planet's. They see the pressure building under the Toba caldera. They know the eruption is inevitable. And in that inevitable catastrophe, they see an opportunity. A chance to leave, completely undercover. They could have timed their final departure burn to coincide with the Toba eruption. The immense seismic activity from their launch, the atmospheric disruption, the chemical fallout, all of it would be completely masked by the far greater chaos of the supervolcano. The launch's energy release would be written off as a seismic echo of the eruption. The strange isotopes flung into the atmosphere would be mixed in with the trillions of tons of volcanic ash and sulfur, becoming an indecipherable part of the geological noise. For them, the eruption wasn't the disaster. It was the perfect distraction. It was the curtain of fire and ash they needed to slip away, unnoticed. Any anomalous data that future scientists like us might find in that 74,000-year-old ash layer would just be dismissed as a quirk of the eruption itself. We'd see the evidence of their departure, but we would call it something else. We'd call it geology. Think about the sheer, cold brilliance of that plan. To use the planet's own death, rattle as a cover for your own escape. It's a sobering thought that one of the most significant natural disasters in our planet's history might have been hiding an even more significant, an entirely unnatural event. An exodus hidden in an apocalypse. So we have two possibilities for a clean getaway. One is the slow, patient construction in orbit. The other is the clever, opportunistic use of a natural disaster as camouflage. But there is a third way. A way that combines physical remoteness with an almost perfect method of hiding the evidence over time. It requires going to the one place on Earth that still holds its secrets closer than any other. The one continent we have barely begun to understand. A place whose true nature is buried under miles of solid ice. We are talking, of course, about Antarctica. Today, Antarctica is a frozen, inhospitable desert. But it wasn't always that way. In the deep past, it was a greenland with forests and rivers. And even in more recent geological time, its climate has fluctuated. But its greatest asset, for a civilization wanting to hide something, is the ice. The immense continental ice sheet is, on average, well over a mile thick. It is a blanket, a vault, and a tomb, all in one. What if our ancient civilization built their entire departure infrastructure there? Not just a launch pad, but their factories, their power plants, their cities, all located on the Antarctic continent before the ice fully consumed it. We have better maps of the surface of Mars than we do of the bedrock buried beneath the Antarctic ice. We know there are vast mountain ranges down there, the Gambardseff Mountains, as large as the European Alps, completely submerged in a sea of frozen water. We know there are over 400 sublatial lakes, pockets of liquid water that have been sealed off from the outside world for millions of years. It is, for all intents and purposes, a lost world. So, imagine this civilization launching their ark from the heart of that continent. The launch itself would have been immense, certainly. It would have melted a colossal amount of the surrounding ice and blasted a temporary hole in the atmosphere. But what happens after they are gone? The planet's own natural processes take over. The snow begins to fall again, as it always does. Year after year, century after century, fresh layers of snow pile up. They compress into dense glacial ice. The hole they left behind begins to fill in. The ice flows like an impossibly slow river, erasing the scars on the landscape. Over thousands of years, the evidence is not just weathered away, it is deliberately and methodically buried. Buried under miles of ice that grinds, shifts, and conceals everything beneath it. It is like trying to find a footprint on a beach, but a beach where the tide is always coming in. The ice is their tide. It is the perfect accomplice to their disappearance. Any structures, any radiation, any geological disturbance would now be so deep, so thoroughly entombed, that finding it would be harder than finding a needle in a haystack. It would be like finding a specific grain of sand in a mountain of concrete. The secret isn't gone. It is just preserved. In the deepest, coldest, most inaccessible vault on the face of the earth. A city, a launch complex, an entire chapter of planetary history, flash frozen and waiting. It's a tantalizing thought that our modern expeditions, drilling ice cores to study past climates, might one day hit something that isn't rock. That their drills might bring up a fragment of something that has no business being there. A strange metal alloy. An impossible fossil. A clue from the bottom of the world. So, we are left with these three ingenious scenarios. The quiet patience of building in orbit. The clever opportunism of hiding in a volcano's fury. Or the cold, calculated secrecy of launching from a continent that automatically buries its own past. Each of these ideas tells us something important about the civilization we are imagining. They weren't just technologically superior. They were masters of strategy. They were planners who thought in geological timescales. The lack of a giant, obvious smoking gun on Earth doesn't have to be evidence against their existence. In a strange way, it might be the most powerful evidence for it. It might be the ultimate proof of their intelligence. They knew how to solve not just the engineering problem of leaving, but the historical problem of being remembered, or not remembered, in the way they chose. They were careful. They were quiet. They were thorough. They had the foresight to not just close the door behind them, but to make it look as if the door was never there at all. And if they were that good at hiding the physical evidence of their departure, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? It makes you wonder what kind of stories, what kind of myths or messages they might have intentionally left behind for us to find. And if they were that good at hiding the physical evidence of their departure, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? It makes you wonder what kind of stories, what kind of myths or messages they might have intentionally left behind for us to find. But maybe that's where we've been looking at this all wrong. We've spent this entire journey searching for clues, for footprints in stone and echoes in our myths. We've been acting like detectives at the scene of a very, very old crime, dusting for fingerprints that have long since faded. We've been searching for proof. And yet, after all this time, after all these questions, we come to the most important one. The one that quietly underpins everything we've talked about. Does it actually matter if it's true? I mean that sincerely. Does the power of this idea, the story of a civilization that packed its bags and sailed into the stars, truly depend on whether or not we can find a rivet from their ship or a notation in their star charts? I don't think it does. Its real power, the reason this idea has captivated people for generations, isn't in evidence or in proof. It's in the way it makes us feel. It is in the way it takes the two most mysterious parts of our existence, our deep, unknowable past and our vast, unknowable future, and weaves them together into one single grand, sweeping story. What we've been exploring together is, in a very real sense, a modern myth. Now, when we hear the word myth, we often think of something that's just not true. A fantasy. A fairy tale for a bygone era. But that's not really what myths are for. The ancient Greeks who told stories of Icarus and Prometheus didn't think they were writing a literal history textbook. They were creating a language to talk about ambition, about hubris, about the very fire of human consciousness. Myths are the software we use to run the hardware of our brains. They are the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of a universe that can often feel chaotic and frighteningly random. They give us a framework, a sense of place. And the idea of an ancient civilization escaping Earth is the perfect myth for our time. It's a story born in the 20th century, a time when we first saw our own planet from space and simultaneously developed the power to destroy it. It's a myth that could only exist after we understood the true scale of the cosmos and the very real possibility of leaving our world behind. It takes the ancient wonder of the pyramids and Stonehenge and connects it directly to the futuristic wonder of starships and interstellar travel. It creates a single, unbroken thread running from the dawn of humanity to its potential twilight. It gives us a narrative that is so much bigger than our own recorded history. It tells us that the story of intelligence on Earth didn't begin with us, and maybe, just maybe, it will not end with us either. It's a story that re-enchants the world. It turns a strange geological anomaly from a scientific curiosity into a potential clue. It transforms an ancient legend from a simple folk tale into a fragmented memory. It makes the whole world feel like a treasure map, where every piece of ancient history could be a hint, a breadcrumb left behind by our predecessors. There's a wonderful way to think about this. Imagine you are far away from any city lights on a perfectly clear night. You look up, and what do you see? You see thousands and thousands of tiny, random points of light scattered across a black canvas. It is chaos. It is a beautiful chaos, but it is chaos nonetheless. There's no inherent order to it, no pattern. But we humans, we can't stand chaos. We are pattern-seeking animals. It's our greatest gift and sometimes our biggest flaw. And so, we do something remarkable. We start connecting the dots. We draw imaginary lines from one star to another. Suddenly, that random cluster of lights over there isn't random anymore. It's a hunter with a belt and a sword. That's Orion. And that arc of stars? That becomes a great bear or some major. That little cluster becomes a queen in her chair, Cassiopeia. We tell stories about them. We weave them into the fabric of our culture. We use them to navigate the seas and to mark the passing of the seasons. Now, here's the crucial part. We know the lines aren't really there. We know, with our modern telescopes, that the stars making up Orion's belt aren't even next to each other. They are separated by unimaginable distances, their alignment just a beautiful accident of our perspective here on Earth. But does that knowledge make the constellation any less real to us? Does it make the story of the hunter any less powerful? No. Because once you've seen the pattern, you cannot unsee it. The story becomes more real than the random collection of dots it's made of. The constellation is a shared act of imagination. And that is exactly what we've been doing throughout this journey. The Fermi paradox, the silence in the cosmos, that's one of our stars. The Antikythera mechanism, a piece of technology that seems too advanced for its time, that's another star. The myths of Atlantis or the sky-dwelling gods of countless ancient cultures, those are more stars. The strange isotopic ratios in a geological layer, the Nazca lines visible only from the air, our own deep-seated feeling of loneliness in the universe. Each one is another point of light in the great, dark sky of our history. On their own, they are disconnected. They are fascinating anomalies, historical curiosities, philosophical problems. But the story of a departed civilization, that's the imaginary line we draw between them. It's the constellation. It's the pattern we create that suddenly gives all those random points a meaning, a shape, a story. It connects the dots. And just like with the constellations in the sky, it doesn't really matter that the lines themselves aren't physically there. The act of drawing them, of telling the story, reveals something profound about us. It reveals our deepest hopes and our deepest fears. Our desire for connection, our need for an origin story, and our longing to believe that we are part of something ancient and vast. We tell this story because it addresses the most fundamental human question: are we alone? And it provides an answer that is so much more comforting and interesting than a simple yes or no. It answers with a maybe not now, but you weren't always. It suggests we are not a cosmic accident, that we are part of a lineage. It feels so much less lonely to think of ourselves as the children left behind in the old family home than to think we are the only child there ever was. The quiet of the house feels different if you know others once lived there. It's not empty, it's just quiet. In the end, this idea, this modern myth, does for us what all great stories have always done. It makes us look up. It makes us lift our gaze from the immediate, from the daily routines and worries, and look to the horizon, to the past, to the future, to the stars. It makes us wonder about our place in the universe, not with arrogance, as its sole inheritors, but with a sense of humility and curiosity. It puts our own challenges, our own triumphs and failures, into a much larger perspective. We've explored so many paths on this journey. We've looked at ancient myths and modern science, at lost artifacts, and the vast silence of space. We've considered climate change, generation shifts, and the very psychology of why we believe what we believe. But it all comes back to that simple, quiet idea we started with. That feeling you get when you look up at the night sky and sense a profound and beautiful quiet. The feeling that you've arrived at a party long after the most interesting guests have already gone home. Maybe they have. Or maybe they just left the door unlocked for us. Maybe the story is the key. And so, perhaps it doesn't matter if the story is literally true, written in the fossil record or in the light of a distant star. Its truth lies in what it encourages us to do. To explore. To question. To imagine. And to keep listening to the great, silent dark. Because it gives us a quiet, hopeful story to tell ourselves on a clear night as we stare into that beautiful, endless expanse. A story to make the silence feel a little less empty. We are not the first. And we may not be the last.